Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
2 is Company by TheHumilisScriptor. Luffy, in an act of desperation, manages to save Nami from being separated on Sabaody, and now the Navigator joins him for adventures on Amazon Lily and beyond. Impel Down, Marineford, none are ready for this company of two. Brian McKenzie Warlord, Zach Travis Warlord, Garrick Russell Warlord, Ben Brownlee Warlord, King Nemo Warlord, Tristan Ward Warlord, KSG PL4YZ Warlord. Adios.
We are warriors of the Kuja. You have no right to treat us this way, she yelled angrily, covering the forms of her cowering sisters with her body. A glare on her face was only met with laughter from her new master. Pirates, marine, civilian, all are the same. All are cattle in the eyes of the gods. The man paused, mockingly engaging in a moment of rhetorical thought. And I'm sure you pirates are well aware that cattle. The sound of sizzling filled Hancock's ears, but her posture in front of her sisters didn't waver for a moment. Needs to be branded. The fat man turned to her, grinning like a maniac as he held a branding iron in his hand. Its red-hot glow illuminating the room and burning itself into Hancock's retinas. At its tip, the logo resembling a hoof blazed, burning deep into her soul. Hold her. The command was simple, and Hancock fought. Oh, she fought indeed. A prodigy of the Kuja, she had put up more resistance than the ignorant and cruel could have ever expected. But it wasn't enough. She was too weak. A gaggle of unseen hands coiled around her, dragging her before the man's feet and throwing her roughly to her knees in submission. But Hancock was of the conqueror, and those of her disposition did not submit. Her struggle continued, the firm grip almost slipping but tightening as more hands joined. You're a feisty one, aren't you? You will be an example to the other rebellious slaves. Hancock felt a cold chill run down her spine as he walked past her. The men turned her around, practically forcing her eyes open. But first, you must learn. He approached her sisters. Observe now, Kuja warrior. The might of the heavens. The brand came down on Sandersonia's back like a hammer. The screams of her sisters would remain in Hancock's nightmares. Forever. The warlord snapped herself out of her daydream with a shake of her head, trying to cast away the memories. The first men we ever saw were nothing but monsters. Hancock pressed on, but was interrupted by Sandersonia's wails and screams as the green-haired sister clutched her head in agony. This only reminded Hancock further of the buried nightmares. And now blood began to fall from the grip around her own arm. Nyan quickly stood to comfort Sandersonia, wrapping her arms around her as best she could in an embrace. It's all right. Everything's all right. You're safe here. Her voice was soothing, but more importantly, practiced. Nami could tell Nyan had done this 100 times, and that only made her heart wrench in two. Luffy quickly stood, throwing his hands up in front of him in response to the Snake Sisters' pain. Listen, you don't have to tell me, don't push yourselves. I don't need to know the details. In the chaos and confusion, something in Nami acted. She approached Hancock gently, just enough for Salome to sense she meant no harm, and carefully placed her hand on Hancock's clenched fist. Luffy watched as Hancock looked up in surprise, then slowly released her grip on herself at Nami's gentle prompting. The two women stared at each other for a moment, the Snake Princess confused beyond belief, a swirl of conflicting emotions flooding her mind as she found herself submitting to the Navigator's help. The understanding in the Navigator's brown eyes. Hancock couldn't even begin to comprehend it, for she had never seen it in anyone before. Outrage was her mind's only response, a defense mechanism well practiced over the years. However, Nami retreated before Hancock could rebuff her, and the warlord stared at the two pirates before her, almost compelled to explain. I knew nothing but despair. I used to pray for death. And yet, one day, our suffering ended after 4 years. A scoff of self-hatred escaped her lips. Only 4 years. What right do we have compared to the suffering of those who still endure to this day? Nami moved to rebuff this before Luffy could, her brows furrowing in protest, but Hancock continued before she could speak. Nobody stood up to the world nobles, none would dare. That was, until a man who dared to climb the red line with his bare hands snuck into the holy land of Mariajoy, the home of the celestial dragons. An adventurer who would one day command an entire crew of fishmen. Fisher Tiger. Nami's eyes widened. A crew of fishmen, before the Arlong pirates? He entered the city responsible for so much cruelty, so much hatred, and he razed it to the ground to free his fellow fishmen who had been enslaved. He, who hates humans as a species, still saved thousands of slaves without regard for who they were or where they came from. Nami's stunned silence persisted as her mind processed both the horror of Hancock's words and their implications for her own history. We fled as fast as we could. Fueled only by desperate hopes. The debt we owe to Fisher Tiger can never be repaid. It was he who released a horde of fishmen upon the seas, but they would wear the mark of slavery for the rest of their days. Nami's eyes widened, her throat tightening as Hancock confirmed her theory. Hancock's freedom had come at the cost of Nami's own, a chain of events that Nami didn't delve into, unprepared for such thoughts. Instead, she focused on what was being said, trying to disconnect herself. Tiger was hunted relentlessly by the world government, so he gathered every fugitive and formed the Pirates of the Sun, heading for the outer seas. To erase the trace of their bondage, the slaves turned the symbol of the celestial dragons into the symbol of the sun. Nami was stunned beyond words, her eyes wide as she struggled to process the truth before her. The men who had placed her in bondage, who had forced her into servitude, had been slaves as well? All of them? They had understood? They had experienced it, understood it, and yet, they had the audacity to inflict that upon her? Before Nami could lose herself in thought, she felt the weight of a straw hat on her head. She turned to look up at her captain, who had placed it on her without even looking at her, and Nami felt herself calm, her breathing stabilizing as she practically leaned into the hat resting on her head. That idiot, so, does that mean Hachi was a slave? Luffy asked, ever concerned for his friends. Nami focused on the hat resting on her head, avoiding the implications of such a truth. Sandersonia, now calm enough to speak, answered. Not necessarily. All of Tiger's pirates took that mark to make it impossible to know which of them had once been slaves. But it does mean your friend sailed under the flag of the Sun Pirates at some point. Nami thought back to her own memories now, to a conversation long ago. Nami exited her room, shutting the door behind her with enough force to feel a small glimmer of satisfaction. A small victory in a world of loss as she walked away from her prison. Across the hallway, she looked through the open door to see Arlong writing something in his room, though Nami didn't know what. Nami's heart coiled with malice at the sight of her captor. Yet curiosity burned within her as it did all cats. The surveyor of the Arlong pirates approached her. Captain. By the time she reached the door's threshold, Nami had gathered enough courage to speak, but it vanished as soon as Arlong turned. His eyes, the same ones that had watched her mother die, locking onto her. Nami squirmed. Ah, Nami. His deep voice never failed to make the 11-year-old want to curl into a ball. Have you finished your maps from your surveying trip? Arlong's shark-like smile emerged as Nami nodded, much to her discomfort. I finished the map of the Goa area today, she timidly confirmed. The trip hadn't been far, but it had been grueling for reasons beyond the obvious. Nami's stay in Windmill Village had been hard to leave behind, especially after meeting the kind, green-haired bartender. The memories of that stay lingered, making the task of charting the map even more difficult. Good. Then, pull up a chair. The crew are partying in the middle of Gosa right now, so we have more than enough time to chat. Nami Flint Arlong, ever perceptive, laughed, both to torment and to reassure her. Don't worry, I've told them that if they harm anyone in that town, then I will have no choice but to punish them severely. Wouldn't want to lose our profit margins after all. Resisting the urge to growl, Nami pulled up a chair and sat next to the large fish man, hating the meekness she couldn't help but show. Thank you, Arlong. The words felt vile to say, but Nami would persist. She had to, for everyone. Of course, Nami. I always look after my crewmates' interests. Nami resisted the urge to punch him in the face, as she had many times before. Crewmate? Nami despised the word, as it only reminded her of her entrapment. But Nami's curiosity, the same that had brought her into this room, pushed her to speak. Arlong. Her tone was emotionless. A perfectly practiced mask of indifference. That symbol on your chest, on everyone's chests. What does it mean? Arlong tensed, and Nami mirrored him, bracing herself for punishment. But the fishman stayed silent for a moment before speaking. You've definitely finished your maps for this month. His question forced a nod from the girl. Then, it's time I give you a present, right? Nami didn't respond, fear gripping her heart. Arlong pushed his shirt aside and tapped the symbol with one of his long fingers. This is the mark of brotherhood. It's the mark of resistance against the crimes of your species. Nami blinked, frowning in confusion. Ignoring his rhetoric, she pressed for a clearer answer. But, how does it mean those things? Arlong glanced at Nami's shoulder, and for perhaps the only time, looked at the orange-haired girl with nothing but honesty and understanding. A moment that would never come again. That tattoo on your arm, it burns, doesn't it? Nami's eyes widened at the question. Did he understand? Her mind raced. Why would he do this to me if he understood? Why? She watched as Arlong tapped the symbol on his chest. This burns too, every day. A reminder of what was taken from me. The sad smile on Arlong's face stunned Nami into silence, the two staring at each other with intent. The vulnerability the fishman was showing, Nami didn't know whether to feel sick or sympathetic. For Arlong to humanize himself. This was not what Nami had wanted. Thankfully, the fishman seemed to sense her inner turmoil, standing and gripping her shoulders tightly, making her wince. If you ever talk about this again, I'll have everyone in your village killed and make you watch as I crush each one under my foot. Nami's gaze instantly hardened, the mask fully returning as she nodded and shook herself free of his grip before walking out of the room. Whatever. Anger bubbled in her throat, rising in full force. How dare he? How dare he reveal all that to her? The man who had murdered her mother in cold blood before her eyes dared to show his humanity. She refused. No, whatever humanity Arlong had must have died long ago. This was Nami's only truth. So, where's that tiger guy now? Luffy's voice snapped Nami out of her daydream, bringing her focus back to the room and those around her. Alas, Fisher Tiger has long since died. When he did, the Sun Pirates split into smaller crews. Nami tuned into that, turning to Nyan with curiosity. Well, that at least explains how the Arlong pirates came to be. She wasn't sure if learning all this made her life in reflection better or worse. But that explains why you mistook my mark for that of the Sun Pirates. Hancock began, looking at Luffy with firm determination. Ironically, the devil fruits that the world nobles forced us to eat for their pleasure is what has made it possible to deceive this country and protect our secret. If you had not covered Sandersonia's back earlier, we wouldn't have been able to stay in this country. Tears streamed down Hancock's face, stirring a new wave of sympathy in Nami as she realized the sisters' bodies had been fundamentally altered without their consent. The very power they wielded was nothing but a reminder of the shadow of their past. Even if it means deceiving my people, I will never let my guard down. I will not let anyone control me or my sisters ever again. And there it was, laid out in full before Nami's eyes, the sobbing warlord, confirming her suspicions. The mask Hancock wore, the same mask Nami recognized from her own past, was crumbling. And with it, so did Hancock. What she had gone through. Nami didn't blame the woman for letting her stony visage consume her so. The coldness and cruelty, while an act, had become instinct to Hancock. It had become who she was. Nami felt nothing but sympathy for her. Yet even now, as she cried before them, Nami could see there was hope. To cry and open up like this, Nami knew, was how stone masks broke. Luffy, help me. Nami sighed, leaning on her palm as she stared at the pirate empress with understanding. Hancock continued to sob, burying her face in her thighs, cradling herself. I'm afraid of being vulnerable to anyone, and I always will be. But it sire has been a long time since you were sincere about your own feelings, Nyan announced, balancing on her staff with a smile. I actually thought that your heart might have turned to ice by now. Nami gave the old woman a knowing side eye, realizing she had practically mirrored Nami's own thoughts in much simpler terms. Though, judging by the glare Hancock sent her way, Nami was thankful she hadn't vocalized any of those thoughts out loud. Silence, you old gremlin. You are a traitor to the Kuja, Hancock's bellow, likely a self-defense mechanism. caused Nyan to twitch angrily atop her staff, pointing a fierce finger at the Kuja Empress. "You are the one who should be silent." Her yell was that of a mother dealing with a rebellious daughter. "When you were saved from the world Niobles, you were just a helpless little girl with no knowledge of how to return home. Who do you think it was who brought you back here? After all, you only made it to Amazon Lily because I lived outside the kingdom?" Hancock snarled, body coiling as if she were ready to strike. "A small kindness you will never let us forget." Nami raised a brow at Hancock while Nyan raged in what seemed to be practice in response, though now the navigator at least understood. This poor woman had no idea how to express herself, not even to Nyan, the woman who had saved her. There were times when Nami had been so genuinely angry. At Genzo, Nijiko, and everyone else. Perhaps she blamed them, or perhaps it was a reflection of how she felt about herself. But in the end, Nami loved them too much to harbor true resentment as Hancock did. Perhaps that was the difference between them? Another sigh escaped her lips, and she couldn't help but look at Hancock with boundless sympathy. Now that you know that I was a slave, do you despise me?" Hancock's question was directed at Luffy, but Nami could feel her gaze too, despite the Snake Princess facing away. Luffy tilted his head in confusion at Hancock's question. And why wouldn't he? Nami knew he couldn't even begin to comprehend despising someone for that. "Are you kidding me? I already told you, your past doesn't matter. Besides, I hate those celestial dragon guys." Nami allowed a smile to cross her lips as she stood, brushing the dust off her knees. Hancock turned to Luffy in complete surprise, a smile forming on her lips as tears welled up in her eyes. "As if I could hate you for something out of your control." Nami's words earned a shocked look from Hancock as well. Nami had to hold her tongue to stop herself from saying that she still thought Hancock was a bitch, even if the words would have been said fondly. The Snake Princess stared at her, as if trying to comprehend an internal dialogue she couldn't hear. Regardless, Luffy's words washed over her, and her smile grew wider. "I like you. You said you had another request, correct? Very well, tell me where you wish to go, and I shall lend you a ship." Okay, maybe Nami would take Ba. Probably not. The shock of Hancock's words washed over her, and it did to Luffy too, as both were staring wide-eyed. "Really?" Hancock nodded, and Luffy immediately let out a cheer, grabbing Nami's hands and spinning her around. "Yeah, we're gonna see the crew again." Nami smiled just as brightly, laughing as they spun around. "Sabaody Archipelago, here we come." Nami's shouts blended with Luffy's, and Hancock seemed pleased by the joy she had created in the room, her cheeks growing warm. "Very well, we will arrange a ship tomorrow morning to take you to Sabaody." Hancock's announcement echoed through the room, and Luffy beamed at the older woman, bowing in thanks. "Thank you so much for the trouble." His voice brimmed with happiness, the relief palpable in his entire body. The joy quickly faded when his stomach growled. Luffy's face turned sheepish as he gripped his stomach. "Oops. Guess I'm hungry." The rubber captain put his arms behind his head with a chuckle, and Nami leaned in toward him. But then a scent wafted into her nose, and her face twisted in disgust. Luffy. You stink," Nami groaned, and Luffy looked confused for a moment before sniffing in her direction. His eyes narrowed into a glare as he sought to defend himself. "I stink? You stink too." The two looked ready to break into a disagreement, but were interrupted by Hancock, who had taken the time to look them both over. "I suppose you'll need to get washed and changed before heading back to Sabaody. Mari, Sonia, call for the city defenders to escort our new guests to the hot springs. Have new clothes prepared for the witch and get the man a shirt with a less girly look. After which, they may be served dinner." The Snake Sisters nodded at the orders, turning to the two pirates with pleasant expressions. "Come along, man, witch." Marigold walked toward the door, and Nami and Luffy shrugged at the names but followed along regardless. "Okay, but we do have names, you know," Nami pointed out. Marigold paused at the threshold of the door, as if the matter hadn't occurred to her. "I see. And they are? Nami. And this bonehead here is Luffy," Nami said, grabbing Luffy by the collar despite his protests. "Nice to meet you, Nami and Luffy," Sandersonia said with a smile, swinging open the door to reveal the city once again. "Welcome to Amazon Lily." It didn't take long to reach the hot springs, though Nami tried to push away the memories of the last time she had been there. A blush threatened to creep up her cheeks as they looked around at the empty springs. The two pirates had chosen to head out on their own, and the Snake Sisters had told them that the city defenders would meet them there. But judging by the silence, it seemed the pirates had arrived first. Nami took a moment to admire the beauty of the empty springs. The waters sparkled in the quiet afternoon sun, and the white stone beneath was almost hidden by the shimmering liquid above. It was quite amazing without the crowds of women and the constant stress of their identities being discovered. She could finally take a moment to relax, at least for a bit. Nami realized how foolish that thought was the moment she remembered who was with her, just as a loud splash interrupted her thoughts. "Nami, I'm drowning, help me, help!" Her captain's frantic yells made Nami sigh, running toward the water with an exasperated glare. "Luffy, what did I tell you about leaping without looking?" Her tone was irritated, but that didn't stop her from jumping into the water without hesitation, uncomfortable Amazonian clothes and all. After grabbing hold of Luffy's vest, Nami wrenched him out of the water and onto the spring's edge, ensuring he was out of harm's way. It didn't take long for the raven-haired pirate to recover, smiling brightly at his navigator. "Thanks, Nami," he laughed, completely oblivious to Nami's annoyance, as usual. "Look at what you've done. Your clothes are completely soaked." "So are yours." His retort earned him a light punch on the shoulder, though it was gentle by Nami's standards. "That's because I was helping you, you dumbass." Her complaint was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps, and Nami turned to see the familiar group of women. The city defenders had arrived, and one in particular, after all that had happened, Nami was glad to see. "Kikyu. Margaret." Nami beamed, jumping up to greet the approaching women. Margaret quickly leapt into Nami's arms, relieved she no longer had to hold any animosity toward the pirate. Nami laughed, embracing her warmly. She had always regarded Margaret and Belladonna highly, and she was glad to leave any negative feelings behind. Speaking of, "Where's Belladonna? Is she okay?" Nami asked, worried that the woman might have taken her actions to heart. Margaret frowned for a moment, while Sweet Pea and Aphilandra greeted Luffy with smiles, thinking over Nami's question seriously. "She's fine, though she did seem a bit put off by something." Nami frowned, and Margaret quickly added, "Not because of you. I think you should visit her before you leave. I'm sure she'd like that." Margaret untangled herself from Nami with a sheepish smile, leaving the navigator feeling sufficiently reassured. With that, the blonde turned to Luffy, excited to greet him. This left Nami with Kikyu. The two women staring at each other for a moment in what could only be described as an awkward silence. Surprisingly, Kikyu decided to break the silence. "I am glad you are okay." It seemed she was struggling to express her feelings, especially after how she had treated Nami earlier that day. The orange-haired woman sighed, quickly walking over to Kikyu and wrapping an arm around her shoulders, a grin on her face. "No hard feelings, Kikyu." Nami's grin, cat-like and full of mischief, was meant to reassure the black-haired woman. She extended her other hand, waiting for Kikyu to take it. "Friends?" Kikyu stared at the offered hand as if it were alien, then visibly relaxed, a soft smile crossing her face for perhaps the first time Nami had ever seen. She grasped Nami's hand with her own, providing a nod to go along with it. "Friends." The two walked over to the other city defenders and Luffy, the group chatting animatedly until they were interrupted by the arrival of Elder Nyan. "Are you two gyoing to get ready or continue gossiping like old ladies? And I should meow after all, I am one." Luffy and Nami blinked in surprise, suddenly remembering they had come to bathe. Luffy laughed, relieved that he had already been in the water. He hated baths. "I guess we should get ready." Margaret smiled, stepping forward with a pile of clothes under one arm and 2 towels in the other. She handed them to Luffy and Nami, and the navigator nodded in thanks before preparing to undress for her bath. Until she noticed everyone still watching her. A cat-like grin crossed her face as she turned to the group with a mischievous expression. "Unless you're all willing to pay the fee, I'd suggest you turn the other way." The warriors nodded and quickly complied, turning around to avoid her wrath. Nami almost undressed right then, but Luffy was still staring at her with a goofy grin. A quick punch to the head corrected his behavior. "Idiot, that means you too." "Sorry, Nami," Luffy said, drying himself off with a towel as Nami slipped into the hot spring with a relieved sigh, her modesty hidden by the steam rising from the water's edge. Luffy, now out of her view, chatted away with the women while he evidently changed into his new clothes, something Nami might have scolded him for if she weren't so relaxed. Besides, it wasn't like they hadn't seen his junk before anyway. Nami was too relaxed to even question why she cared in the first place. Thankfully, she had only been interrupted a few minutes later when she was just about ready to exit the water. She hadn't planned on remaining in there for long anyway. "Whoa Nami, look at my shirt, it's awesome." Nami turned to look at her captain. He was wearing the same old vest he always wore, so she was so excited about. "Luffy, it's exactly the same as your old vest." "Yeah, but I've never had a green shirt before. This is sweet." Nami blinked at him, an annoyed yet fond smile crossing her face. Of course, that idiot would be fascinated by a new shirt color. What else did she expect? It was probably the highlight of his day. As Luffy resumed chatting with the Kuja warriors, Nami instructed them to turn around again. After drying herself off, she slipped into the new clothes that had been provided. She took a moment to inspect her new look, as well as Luffy's. As always, he had his straw hat on his head, but now he wore a dark green vest. Nami had to admit, the green vest was quite striking when paired with his brown shorts. She wasn't so sure about her own outfit, though. She'd been given the same orange shirt she had worn on Sabaody, now repaired and clean. Her small white shorts had been replaced with a short white skirt, something Nami could appreciate, though the implications of their clothing in general still bothered her. Nami wondered if their distinctive clothes were meant to make them stand out, as they differed so much from those of the Amazonians. If anything happened, they'd be easy to spot, but she filed that untrusting thought to the back of her mind, at least while in the company of friends. Nami leaned down to pick up her Klima tact, which she had left on the ground while bathing, and Kiku immediately took notice. After all, she believed it was the weapon that had injured her during their initial confrontation. "Nami, I've been meaning to ask, what is that staff of yours?" Nami turned to her black-haired friend with a smile, twirling the staff around in her hands with deft fingers. It's a weapon that one of our crewmates built for me." Luffy nodded with a grin, finally turning to face Nami. "Yep, Usopp's really smart when it comes to building stuff. Once, he built a gun that fired toast, and me and Chopper Desi." "Not now, Luffy," Nami interrupted, though she knew exactly how that story ended. After all, toast wasn't now banned in the aquarium for nothing. "When you struck me with an attack from it, it was unlike anything I have ever felt. I have heard stories of weather phenomena, and your weapon matches the description. Am I correct?" Nami tilted her head, then realized the women had likely never experienced weather due to living in the calm belt. For someone like her, who lived and breathed weather, it was unimaginable. No wind, no rain. Nami didn't even want to think about it. Evidently, the women felt the same, judging by their eager expressions at the opportunity before them. Margaret, the most enthusiastic of the group, was practically bouncing on her toes. "Really? Could you give us a demonstration? I've always wanted to see weather. Could you show me, Nami?" Nami didn't hesitate, considering the circumstances and her love for weather phenomena, and Luffy's encouraging smile didn't help either. A grin spread across her face. "Sure, why not?" Kiku nearly joined in the cheer with her fellow city defenders. To think, they were about to witness the weather so coveted by those who left the borders of their country. Nami separated the pole into its three components, gripping two of them after a quick twirl. She began to rotate the pieces together. Cool ball and heat ball, the small blue poles unleashed a barrage of their respective balls, which collided in the air. Pride stirred in Nami's chest as a cloud began to form above them, and an explanation tumbled from her lips without her even realizing. You see, the heat balls absorb moisture from the air, and the hot air rises and collides with the cold air. The moisture then condenses, forming a cloud. The women all nodded, fascinated, while a fond smile spread across Luffy's face. It wasn't often that he got to see others appreciate Nami for what she truly was. The best navigator in the world. He brimmed with pride, grinning at his navigator as he leaned his face against his fist. Admittedly though, he had no idea what she was talking about. Mystery balls. Margaret, meanwhile, recalled the cloud that had struck Kiku, her mouth dropping open in awe. "This is amazing." Next, I stop the supply of heat balls and cool balls, and add a thunderball to the mix, turning the cloud into a thundercloud. Nami announced excitedly, but a pregnant pause followed as the pulls refused to stop, with cool balls and heat balls continuing to expand the cloud. I said, I'll stop the supply of heat balls and cool balls. Nami's tone grew frustrated as she shook the poles, but it didn't stop them, and they continued to spit out the energy affecting the weather above. Even Luffy, simple as he was, realized something was wrong when he glanced up. Nami, that cloud is getting huge. Can't you stop that thing? His concern was palpable, mostly because of the worry Nami herself was showing, and he trusted her judgment. I can't, no matter what I press, the cool balls and heat balls keep being made. Nami's voice was more panicked now, and Luffy moved toward her, but was quickly forced to dodge a thunderball that shot out of the pull left on the ground. Nami, what do we need to do to stop it? Luffy continued his approach, but Nami was growing more angry than worried, which was never a good sign. Despite stopping the rotation of the pieces, large amounts of cool and heat balls kept pouring into the air. By now, the cloud was about twice the size of the island. And then there were the thunderballs to deal with, as what had been a harmless white cloud was now turning dark and ominous. Even the women had grown nervous now, with Sweet Pea looking up in horror. These storm clouds were the kind the Kuja pirates had often spoken of. The saga of, I believe we have seen enough. Nami's rage took over, her teeth gritting before Luffy could react to calm her down. I'm trying, but it won't stop, useless things. With that, she flung the cool pole to the ground in frustration. The clunk echoed across the island, and the cool balls being emitted suddenly doubled in size and speed. Naturally, in response to the mishap, the other two poles began to speed up their production as well. The heat pole grew far too hot, and Nami recoiled with a gasp of pain, dropping it as it tumbled to the ground. In response, the three poles sparked in unison, their dials working far beyond their normal output. The dials had entered a state of supercriticality, exponentially increasing the power and speed of their output in their final moments. The climate tact had become the equivalent of a runaway train, and Nami could only step back in horror as she finally took in the sky. The dark cloud now stretched all the way to the horizon, and everyone instinctively backed away. The sun had disappeared, leaving the entire island shrouded in darkness. Nami, I think your climate tact may be broken. Luffy's whisper would have made Nami laugh if not for the sheer horror flooding her mind. The calm belt would only make the storm worse. A hurricane was about to form. Nami couldn't stop the sarcastic comment from slipping out, her only way of coping with the disaster unfolding before her. Oh, you think? Sir, I believe there is something you should see? Drake's panicked call was enough to rouse him from sleep. His eyes peered at his subordinate from beneath his feathered tricorn. The overtly violent sway of the ship reminded him of his current situation, and that he wasn't waking up in his beloved base. He had known this was coming for a while, the approaching war with Whitebeard. Ever since the report about Fire Fist had landed on his mahogany desk, he had suspected there was more to this execution than the Navy was letting on. With some careful prying and thought, he had concluded that Fire Fist was likely the son of Gold D. Roger. Personally, he didn't think that alone was enough to warrant execution, but the boy was a notorious pirate. He had dug his own grave. Still, that hadn't warranted his early departure. After alt for another week or so, no, he had been dispatched by CP7. The thought made him growl as he followed Drake out of the room, still lost in his reverie about the mission. Every Cypher Pole agency had been outsourcing their work since the void left by CP9. As a result, an investigation had landed on his desk. One that, as a fellow vice admiral to the subject in question, made his stomach turn. To think, the Straw Hats had taken down CP9, and so soon after their encounter. Not that he regretted letting them go. Still, he had been ordered to investigate, and he approached it with the genius he was known for. Of course, once he devised a strategy, it was typical of Cypher Pole to make him execute it. As a result, he had to sail all the way to headquarters earlier than anticipated. He wasn't particularly thrilled with that, and the weather seemed to reflect his mood as he stepped through the doorway. Wait. Weather? The Vice Admiral looked up at the dark clouds rolling in from the ship's bow, the wind stronger than anyone aboard the Navy battleship had ever felt. Lieutenant Haberkern stared at the sky with a gulp, while Drake's jaw dropped once more after his initial shock. Those clouds, were they emerging from the calm belt? The storm front was miles away, yet the winds were already strong enough to nearly overturn their ship. Even if it hadn't originated in the calm belt, this was no normal storm. It would destroy most battleships traveling when it hit the tub current. Vice Admiral Jonathan turned to Drake immediately, knowing time was of the essence. Or perhaps it wasn't. This storm would hinder Whitebeard's movements, after all. But then again, it would also hinder theirs. It seemed Portgas d'Ace might be granted a stay of execution after all. If they acted quickly, they could turn this to their advantage. Get me Fleet Admiral Sengoku, now. Sengoku sat behind his desk, watching the seconds tick by with vicious intent. He hated the job of Fleet Admiral, though he had to admit, he was glad the other candidates hadn't been picked when he was promoted. Responsibility was crucial to justice, after all. Still, Sengoku had to admit he missed the field. When he succeeded Kong, the man had given him a wry smile and said he'd better get used to the chair. Sengoku had only realized how right Kong was once he was trapped in the position. Damn him. The veteran fleet admiral glanced down at the growing pile of paperwork that had accumulated since the report from Vice Admiral Jonathan. He was grateful it had been Jonathan who delivered the information. Sengoku trusted his judgment, as the Vice Admiral was practically the next generation's Suru. Sengoku's fingers drummed on his desk in thought, his quiet contemplation mirrored by the unusually solemn Vice Admiral sitting across from him. Garp wasn't smiling. There was no hint of his usual joy. His eyes were filled with a serious intent that, while Sengoku knew he could express, didn't appear often. Jonathan's assessment had been clear. The storm, which had emerged from the calm belt of all places, was growing in strength, power, and most notably, size. The wind howled and battered his office for what felt like the millionth time that day. A storm so powerful it seemed ready to rip Navy headquarters from its foundations. Sengoku glanced at the report from the meteorological department on his desk. According to them, this was one of the greatest storms in 800 years. Perhaps the greatest. And it wasn't just the Grand Line. The atmospheric changes were affecting the New World too, whipping up hurricanes across an entire stretch of the sea. Since it had started in the calm belt. How? God only knows. It was also spreading to the neighboring South Blue. According to the meteorologists, whose report was detailed to the point of absurdity, the calm belt should have prevented a storm from forming in the first place. But if one did, well, they were feeling its effects now. The lack of wind meant the storm wouldn't dissipate, instead gathering strength from the hot tropical oceans to reach unprecedented power. This should have kept it contained within the calm belt, but something had happened that allowed the storm to breach its boundaries and spread. Sengoku glanced at another report on his desk. 4 battleships had been destroyed while in transit, and troops meant to return to Marineford were now pinned down. If Jonathan hadn't anticipated it, Sengoku would have predicted it himself. Thankfully, the enigmatic G8 commander had been able to continue his mission, making a prediction that Sengoku agreed with. As a result, Sengoku gave him clearance to enter Impelled Down. That was, frankly, the only good news. His mission was of vital importance, after all. Sengoku felt the need to speak aloud, even if it was just to Garp. He couldn't piece everything together in his head through thought alone. This is unprecedented. I could hardly believe Jonathan's report. Sengoku was surprised at the anger in his voice, though given the circumstances, he realized it was justified. His fingers drummed faster against the table as he glanced over at Garp. You read Vice Admiral Momonga's report, correct? He's caught in the heart of it. Frankly, it's a miracle he hasn't sunk yet. I've been told he's heading to seek shelter on Amazon Lily, with the hopes of also completing his assigned mission. Garp's reply made Sengoku want to slam his head into the desk. Nothing was going as planned. I doubt Hancock will be happy about that, considering it violates the treaty we signed. But I suppose it can't be helped. A question burned on the tip of Sengoku's tongue, while another retreated to the back of his throat. Before he knew it, he spoke, a desperate attempt to avoid the matter they were both dreading. This storm, do you think it's him? Garp didn't visibly react, but Sengoku knew the old soldier well enough to notice the subtle tension in his face and the way he stiffened in his seat. No, this isn't him. Like it or not, Sengoku, he wouldn't put civilians in the line of fire to this extent. This is something else. Sengoku's jaw might have dropped, if not for years of training. Never, not once, had he and Garp dared to discuss the morality of the Revolutionary Army. The fact that they were doing so now, or rather, that Sengoku was willing to hear it, spoke volumes about the severity of their current situation. Sengoku tugged uncomfortably at his collar. On second thought, this topic might be even more uncomfortable than the one they were avoiding. The legendary Marine decided to call upon the one person even he deferred to as a quick escape, Suru. The third vice admiral of their legendary trio entered the room, a known look on her face as she glanced at her commanding officer. Before Sengoku could speak, she started talking, reading him like a book. Damn her. Time is of the essence. We're currently on the storm's outer edge. Once it hits Marineford, we'll need to take action to prevent any loss of staff or damage to the structure. Sengoku knew what was coming. He didn't want to hear it, but he knew. With a final sigh of resignation, the fleet admiral leaned back, feeling an overwhelming urge to retire already. So, what do you propose? And of course, it was Garp who spoke, leaning forward in his chair. We need to delay the execution of Portgas Dace. Maybe it was because Garp said it, or perhaps it was the last vestiges of Sengoku's desperation clawing forward. Or maybe he was hoping for a middle ground. But his response emerged before he could even think. Out of the question. His fist slammed down on the desk, toppling a pile of paperwork. Suru raised a lazy eyebrow, though she didn't seem surprised. Damn her. In 5 days, that execution must happen. The whole world will be watching. Besides, Whitebeard will make his move. We hardly want to give him more time to prepare against us. We do not have a choice, Sengoku. It's already hard enough to travel in that storm, and you'd have to be crazy to try. In 5 days, we won't even be able to transfer Ace from Marineford. Even if we could, the storm preparations mean we won't have the manpower or resources to stop Whitebeard if he makes it to headquarters. Kizaru is still on his way back from Sabaody. He had to escort the celestial dragons back to Marihoa. Do you really want to commit to a war against Whitebeard without him? As she continued, Sengoku didn't know whether to be relieved or frustrated. After all, she was just voicing the thoughts he'd been unwilling to admit himself. Besides, this delay gives us more time to make preparations than we anticipated. When the storm passes and we've repaired the damage, we'll be more prepared than before to execute Ace. As for Whitebeard, he's in the same situation as us. There's no way he'd risk his crew in this storm. Plus, I've heard the news coups are down because of the storm, so the information blackout works in our favor. Garp nodded as Suru finished, and Sengoku set his glasses down to rub his eyes in exhaustion. They were right, and he knew it. He just needed to hear it. Very well, we'll postpone the execution until this is resolved. Begin preparations to reinforce Marineford against the storm and delay all troop recalls until further notice. Double the surveillance on Whitebeard, and convert the Eni's lobby reconstruction into a temporary storm shelter for any unavoidable troop movements. The Marine listening in nodded and quickly left the room to relay orders before the storm knocked out any communication equipment. Garp gave the door a side-eye, and Sengoku couldn't stop a sigh from escaping his lips. Yes, you are dismissed, Garp. The Maverick Vice Admiral gave a silent salute before practically storming out of the room. Suru, meanwhile, casually placed a transponder snail on his desk, giving him a knowing look. After all, they had more time to recall forces than they'd expect him. Sengoku struggled to keep his face neutral. Damn her. Garp spoke to no one as he strolled through the corridors of Marineford. He couldn't bring himself to speak, weighed down by the knowledge that his agony would stretch on for another month. As he entered the massive courtyard, alarms blared and Marines shouted, desperately scrambling to follow the new orders that had upended everything they had been doing. But Garp remained silent as he boarded his ship, seeing his men already standing at attention. Despite his calm exterior, his heart shuddered with unease, his thoughts consumed by the inner turmoil. Even as he prepared his orders, he still didn't know what he'd do when he reached his destination. And that terrified him. From the way Bogart looked at him from beneath his hat, Garp could tell his most loyal subordinate was reading him like a book. The Vice Admiral knew that whatever decision he made, his right-hand man would follow him without question. Garp wasn't sure how he felt about that. "Sir, shall we help prepare Marineford?" Kobe asked meekly, giving a salute. His concern for the troops stationed on the island was clear, and Garp might have smiled at the boy's good nature and optimism, if his thoughts weren't consumed by another. Steeling himself, Garp looked at every marine under his command. "All right men, set sail for Impel Down." A pause. "WWWHHHAAATTT." Garp burst out laughing, if only to mask his fear. He didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know if he'd last the month. He supposed he'd just have to keep living and find out. Storms were a simple fact of life for everyone on the planet. With oceans as vast and warm as those in the Blues and the Grand Line, they were inevitable. In fact, most people would be more concerned by the absence of storms, fearing that something had changed with the climate. Yet for the people of Amazon Lily, storms were practically a fairy tale. They were the stuff of Kuja pirate stories, fascinating children and keeping the fearful within the island's borders. To the Kuja, storms were omens, beasts of unimaginable power and rage, much like how the ancients might have viewed them. They were forces of godhood, not to be faced or wielded by ordinary mortals. Some, like Margaret, were fascinated by storms, desperately wishing to experience the wind whipping against their skin, the very sensation that had captivated their imaginations. Others, however, were terrified of storms, refusing to leave the calm belt for fear of encountering one. To see a storm above Amazon Lily, well, if the science of meteorology didn't exist, the average Amazonian might think the end of the world was nigh. The sky was completely dark, the sun long gone. The sheer volume of lightning striking the island and the surrounding waters whipped the sea kings into a panicked rage, their roars and cries echoing for miles, heard if not for the constant booming of thunder. Luffy thought back to Water 7 and Aqua Laguna, recalling the massive squall that had ravaged the floating city. The storm Nami had accidentally conjured was eerily similar in strength and terror, perhaps even worse, though the waves didn't tower miles high, nor did they remain still. Instead, they practically shook the island, ravaging the coast and tearing pieces away. The climate tact continued to expand the storm, showing no signs of stopping, while the city defenders next to the rubber captain stood frozen in a trance of horror. The storm clouds had long since stretched to the horizon, showing no signs of stopping, eliciting screams from the nearby village so loud they nearly drowned out the storm and the sea kings. Nami couldn't move, feeling the storm she had created in a way no one else could, its implications paralyzing her. What had she done? If this continued, the island would likely be swept away by the combined forces of the ocean and wind, killing every innocent person on it. What do we do? The hopelessness in Nami's voice would normally have made her cringe, but this time, it was entirely justified as the force of the wind nearly knocked everyone off their feet. Nami felt her captain's arms steadying her at the small of her back, keeping her from being blown away. Despite everything, Luffy didn't seem particularly fazed. In fact, he looked like he had a solution. "It's easy." Nami turned to him, and upon seeing his smirk and the way his hat flapped wildly by its string in the wind, a knot of concern forming in her stomach. "What?" Nami's question came out more like a demand, knowing that even in a storm like this, Luffy had the potential to make things worse. Given the context, however, Nami would take most solutions offered to her. Luffy, unbothered by the wind, held up a finger as if about to give a lecture. "When all else fails, there's one thing we can do that always works." The captain seemed to think his wisdom was profound. But Nami stared at him, deadpan. His words did nothing to reassure her. Nearby, the city defenders clung to the ground for dear life, watching the two in awe. Their ability to banter in such a situation left them speechless. "Oh, tell me your plan, wise one," Nami drawled, but was cut off as Luffy gently pushed her aside. The force of the wind briefly sent her heels over her head, and she had to grab the ground mid-backflip to stop herself from being blown away. Her panicked screams were ignored by her captain, who charged toward the thunder pole without hesitation. In one swift motion, Luffy's foot came crashing down on the device, shattering it into several pieces with the force of his strike. Sparks briefly sputtered, arcing across the ground, but soon died down with a weak, cough-like splutter. The rubber man turned back to the women, who stared at him in shock, as he raised his hand and flashed them a peace sign, his grin wide and proud. "Rake stuff." His hat whipped around behind him, but he quickly secured it with a swift motion. Looking up, Nami noticed the lightning had eased, at least around the island. The wind, though still strong, had calmed enough for her to steady herself on the ground. She stared at her broken clima-tact in horror while Luffy continued to celebrate. "What the hell did you do that for?" Nami shrieked, her fists clenched in frustration, made worse by Luffy's casual shrug and grin. "I just saved the whole island, duh." His mocking declaration made Nami growl in protest as she stormed toward him, a punch ready, only for a loud crackle of thunder above to stop her in her tracks, making her flinch. Her brown eyes took another moment to analyze the storm, worry spreading across her face. The storm's getting worse. "Man, someone should probably do something about that," Luffy said nonchalantly. Though Nami couldn't see them, she could feel the gazes of the city defenders burning into her back. Protest rose in her throat. "Oh yeah, I'll get right on that," she replied bitterly, rolling her eyes. "And how on earth do you suggest I do that?" Luffy shrugged, having not even been speaking to her with his initial comment, but he quickly interrupted her attempt to clobber him by stretching his arms to the two intact pieces of the clima-tact on the ground and shoving them in her face. "You're like super smart and stuff. And you've still got 2 bits left. I know you can fix it." Nami stared at the 2 pieces shoved in her face, frustration building at the sight of them. They were what had caused this mess in the first place. "All that hot air and cold air is what got us into this mess. If you haven't realized, the wind is bad anew." "Wait, the wind? Luffy, you're a genius." Nami cut herself off with a gleeful shout, her moment of eureka making her grab the poles from Luffy's hands. She thrust the 2 ends together, the poles shaking in resistance, but Nami held firm. The streams of cool balls and heat balls merged, forming a blast of wind that shot upwards, soaring toward the enormous storm above. The moment the sword-like gust hit the clouds, the black sky above the island split apart, as though commanded by 2 Conquero pushed the storm further away from the island, allowing the sun to shine on Amazon Lily once again. For the Kuja, the sky was now a bright blue, though dark clouds still loomed on all sides of the island, like a pack of lions waiting to strike. Amazon Lily was now in the eye of the storm, safe, bringing relief to its residents. The city defenders gawked at Nami's weather display as the navigator collapsed in relief, her arms shaking. She dropped the poles in exhaustion and struggled to catch her breath. Luffy, however, just cheered, jumping up and down with a wide smile at the blue sky. "See, I knew you could do it, that was amazing." He sat down beside her, peering at his navigator, and the exhausted grin she gave him reassured Luffy that everything was fine. She collapsed onto her back with another sigh of relief. The sound of Nyan pulling herself out of a pile of trees caught everyone's attention, and if that didn't, her shout certainly did. Why it just happened hyere. It seemed the old woman had been swept away earlier while leaving the springs, unable to keep herself grounded due to her age and the unexpected gust, which sent her crashing into the destroyed tree line. Nami didn't respond, pulling herself into a sitting position. She picked up one of the broken pieces from the ground, frowning as she realized that while they were no longer out of control, they weren't working at all. Recalling Usopp's maintenance instructions, the navigator carefully unscrewed the top of the part in her hands, peering inside with a wary expression. "Hey Luffy, look at this." The shuffling beside her confirmed that he was indeed looking, leaning over to peer inside the device with her. His eyes widened at the sight of the seashell, a large crack running through it and spreading across the width of the dial. In fact, it seemed that clima-tact's chassis was the only thing holding it together. Nyan's demands for an explanation were ignored as the city defenders did their best to catch the former empress up to speed with what they knew. "I'm guessing that had something to do with the malfunction." Her tone couldn't hide her worry, her mind racing to figure out what had caused it and how on earth she was going to fix it. How did it even break like that? Luffy's shrug was almost palpable, given how close they were. "I dunno, things have been crazy. It could have been during that fight against the Snake Girls, the battle against the paw guy, that time I landed on it as we crashed. Anything really." His speculation was genuine, and Nami appreciated his efforts. The pin waited in the air. I guess all of that strained the dials beyond their capacity. The pressure within them must have been off the charts. Her mumbling was met with a moment of silence as she thought over the variables Luffy had given her. And so the pin dropped. "Wait, you landed on my clima-tact?" Her angry yell was accompanied by a glare as she rounded on her captain, who quickly raised his hands in fear, nodding frantically. "Hang on. You said it might have broken due to that overload thing or whatever. Don't blame this on me." His pleas fell on deaf ears. "That was before I knew you landed on my climatat. You probably cracked it and then that prevented it from keeping up with the amount I had to use it. Thanks a lot, idiot." Luffy simply nodded as if he were being informed, not blamed, cupping his chin thoughtfully. "So, it was a mystery crack, huh?" The angry growl and punch to his head were well deserved. The captain shook his head in pain, a soft "ow" escaping his lips. Still, they were alive and well, so Luffy couldn't really complain, except maybe for some food. Luffy looked up at the blue sky, his eyes widening like dinner plates and his jaw dropping. Raising an eyebrow, Nami turned to see what had captured his attention this time, only for her own jaw to drop as well. The city defenders and Nyan followed their line of sight and mirrored the same wide-eyed expression as a certain lightning god from Sky Island. "What the hell is that?" The two Straw Hat pirates exchanged a brief, confused glance before turning back to the sight, as if it might somehow explain itself. "Hey Nami," Luffy's tone was overly casual given the circumstances. "Yeah? Since when did islands float on giant bubbles? Huh, come to think of it, since when did giant bubbles float under islands?" Luffy's tone grew more excited as he spoke, scratching his head while twitching with energy. Before Nami could respond, the familiar sound of clicking heels sent a shiver down her spine. Only one person on this island could be recognized by that haughty gait. The two pirates turned, sheepish expressions on their faces. Hancock was, simply put, irritated, though perhaps that was an understatement. Two pirates had defeated her sisters and were now being allowed to stay on the island, despite Amazon Lily's rules and traditions, all accompanied by a whirlwind of mixed feelings she couldn't begin to understand. 3 hours ago, she had opened herself before them, and in that time, a storm had appeared in the calm belt for the first time in recorded history. And now a floating island was resting above her kingdom. In a simple deduction, she had headed to the hot springs, the most likely source of these events. After parting the panicked crowd held back by her Kuja warriors, Hancock finally found the culprits. The shadow of the floating island above gave some respite from the glaring sun, though the sight of the unnatural phenomenon made her shudder. "One problem at a time," she murmured briefly, steeling herself as she stood above the two pirates, who were sneaking glances at Nami's broken climatat and the floating island. Hancock felt her teeth grit together. She did not like to be ignored. "What happened?" she asked, her voice strained as she stared down at the orange-haired woman. A storm of emotion churned in Hancock's stomach, most of it negative, though she couldn't quite interpret it. Nami's chocolate eyes defiantly met the princess's dark ones, though there was a hint of acquiescence. After what felt like an eternity of half glaring at each other, Nami finally replied with a sheepish look. "My climatat, it broke, and accidentally created a storm." If Nami didn't know weather phenomena as well as she did, she would have sworn a thundercloud had appeared above the warlord's head as she snarled. "So, it was you who brought that foul storm to my kingdom?" Nami's somewhat innocent, cat-like nod only seemed to enrage Hancock further, as she stepped forward with clenched fists. Or perhaps it was the fact that Nami didn't flinch that vexed her more. "How dare you?" Hancock's Haki flared. "I should have your head for this, weather witch. Try it, and you'll wish you hadn't." Hancock looked up at the sound of Luffy's voice, his tone demanding and harsh. The captain of the Straw Hat Pirates was in no mood for games, and his threat, despite her own power, made her shudder. Nami didn't look away from Hancock. In fact, she didn't seem surprised by Luffy's words, instead leaning on her palm and raising an unconsciously arrogant brow in the warlord's direction. Something about the look in Nami's eyes, even if subconscious, infuriated Hancock more than the storm ever could. Still, Luffy's demanding tone echoed in the Snake Princess's mind, and she felt a heat rise in her cheeks. But Luffy. "The storm's gone now, but that thing is still her. We should be finding out what it is." His implication was clear. He wouldn't tolerate any threat towards Nami under any circumstances, but he also seemed incredibly distracted by the flying island, his grayish-black eyes scanning it in fascination. Hancock spluttered in agreement, and Nami couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, confused by the warlord's odd behavior. Luffy, meanwhile, spotted something in the distance and pointed at it. Whoa! Something's coming down from that island. His excitement was unmistakable, and both Nami and Hancock followed the direction he ow. Something was floating downwards, a single dot in the distance that steadily grew larger as it approached. Kuja! To arms! Hancock's yell practically shook the ground, and the warriors holding back the crowd instantly reacted, drawing their bows and aiming at the object descending from the sky island. Nami tried to move away from what was clearly going to be a landing zone, but Luffy refused to budge. Luffy, come on. Let's go, Nami called, but Luffy didn't respond, staying exactly where he was. Nami sighed. That idiot wouldn't pass up the chance to be the first to see whatever cool thing was approaching. With very little hesitation, Nami stood beside him, knowing that getting him out of this whim would take a Herculean effort on her part. Though if anyone on the crew could manage it, it would certainly be her. After a brief moment, the descending object came into full view. A small circular, upside-down dome suspended in the air by a balloon. At least from what Nami could tell, it reminded her of the bikes in Sabaody. Luffy was the first to notice the short, old man inside the device. The man wore a long blue robe and a large, pointed hat. He also had a long, flowing beard that nearly reached the ground. The flying contraption landed in the spring water, resting peacefully without even disturbing the surface tension. Nami's eyes widened. It seemed insignificant, but the engineering to pull that off was staggering. Frankie would have been impressed. The Kuja pirates tightened the strings of their bows as the stranger emerged from his contraption, leaping out with a smile and remaining unperturbed by the hostility. Hey, 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 nice to meet you. His large grin and peculiar way of speaking froze the Kuja in place, though they still watched him warily. Who are you? Hancock's demand was immediate, her glare sharp with anger, though once again, it didn't seem to deter the old man, who smiled happily and gave the warlord a friendly wave. My name is Hades, it's nice to meet you, miss. His response was met with gasps from Hancock and the Kuja, who glared at the old man as if he had just claimed to have bedded all their mothers on the same night. How dare you not know our beautiful princess? The response erupted in unison, and Hades tilted his head in confusion, continuing to speak in an attempt to address the woman who seemed to be in charge. Well, you see, I am here because, well, it is all rather complicated. The explanation came as quickly and scattered as one would expect from an elderly, eccentric scientist. You see, I was told to come here by. He hesitated for a moment, met with cynical glares. This giant person. I know it sounds weird, but it's true. He appeared out of nowhere and, well, made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I mean, when are we ever going to get a chance to study the calm belt? And during what seems to be the most unique weather phenomenon I've ever heard of. Never, that's when. He took a moment to breathe. That's why I accepted his mission, if you will. I was supposed to find someone called the Weather Witch. Immediately, all eyes turned towards Nami, even Luffy's, who leaned closer to her. Hey Nami, do you know any other weather witches? This old man could use your help. Nami pursed her lips in a sheepish, guilty manner and turned to Luffy with an exasperated look. He's talking about me, Luffy. Her drawl was met with widening eyes on behalf of her counterpart. Huh? Why didn't he just say that, then? Your name isn't Weather Witch, ya know? It wouldn't surprise me. A mutter from behind her cut in, and Nami rounded on Hancock with a glare, who met it with her own. Not that Hancock didn't have a reason. After all, Nami understood that the storm had caused more than just physical damage to the island. Hancock seemed more hostile than before, likely viewing her as a threat to the stability of her kingdom. Nami didn't want to be a threat, but she couldn't deny that her Klima tact had made her exactly that. So, you're the Weather Witch? Hades asked, approaching Nami with a curious, almost scrutinizing gaze. Nice to meet you, young lady. Nami felt the sweat drop gather on her head. Likewise, Hades grinned at her reply, then looked down to spot the heat pole at her feet. What's this? His voice brimmed with fascination as he dropped to his knees to pick up a piece of the Klima tact. Hey, don't touch it, Nami protested, but Hades didn't even listen, continuing to examine the Klima tact with wide eyes. This? How did you make this? Both Nami and Luffy blinked at the awe in his voice, as if he were holding a piece of treasure. She didn't, Luffy interrupted, looking down at the old man with an owlish expression. Usopp was the one who made that weather pole thingy. Why do you want to know, old guy? Haredes immediately grew excited at Luffy's response, leaping toward him with a scientist's enthusiasm. Where is this Usopp? I must meet him. This machine is an absolutely incredible contraption. On Weatheria, we've made many advancements in weather science, but I've never seen anything so complex and yet so compact. The old man's excited explanation was followed by him scanning the irritated crowd, eagerly searching for this Usopp. Well, Usopp's in our crew, but we don't really know where he is, or where any of them are, right now. Luffy's answer was downcast, his gaze lowering sadly towards the water. Haredes' excitement quickly faded, and he shook his head, glancing at the Klimattact again. Strange, odd, but then again, this is the calm belt. Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Tell me, Haredes exclaimed gleefully as he turned to Hancock with a broad smile. What's the ecosystem like here? The culture? How did your ancestors reach this island in the first place? Do you even have records that far back? How do you function without rain? How does that affect the food chain? How do the plants survive? How do you travel? How much do you know about the outside world? Do you know this Usopp fellow? The barrage of questions continued, each one irritating Hancock more and more. Look, her loud interruption stunned Haredes into silence. I am Boa Hancock, the pirate empress of Amazon Lily. I am far too beautiful to answer the questions of foolish commoners, especially from a foolish man. All I want to know is why you're on my island and what the witch can do to make you leave. In response to Hancock's speech, Haredes' eyes became hearts and he swooned in place, cooing praises of Hancock's beauty. Much to the warlord's relief. After all, after today, she was begun to wonder if her powers of beauty no longer worked, and it was a cold, harsh relief that her worth remained unchanged. Nami sighed loudly at the old man's perverted nature but listened to his response all the same. Oh, beautiful princess, Haredes exclaimed, nearly falling to his knees. I was sent here by a man who told me to seek out a weather witch, but he didn't tell me what to do once I found her. Just to find her, after a few more seconds of swooning, Haredes turned away from the warlord to focus on Nami, leaving Hancock both stunned and offended. However, this machine fascinates me. I'd love to study it further. May I borrow it for a while? Haredes' request was met with a sharp glare from Nami, while Hancock still grappled with the fact that she was being ignored. That had never quite happened before, especially from a man who seemed like a regular civilian. No, Nami crossed her arms and quickly snatched the heat pole back from his grasp. There was no way she was handing over her most valuable weapon. Sure, it didn't work anymore, but she could still use it to pummel someone black and blue if needed. Hey, 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 Haredes ranted, as if personally affronted by her refusal. Perhaps he was. Haredes exclaimed, sounding personally offended by her refusal. Perhaps he was. Why not? If you help me, then I'll help you. Yes. I have various weather Devish Island that I could bring together, and I'm sure we can make this deal work for both of us. The other scientists could help too, and we could turn you into a real weather witch, giving you control over all of nature. I'm not asking to keep your device, just to study it. That way, we could create blueprints and even replicate it. Imagine the benefits for mankind. Nami was silent under the old man's gaze, and the entire crowd turned to her, interested in her response. Though, many of them were confused by her silence. The navigator, however, was lost in thought, barely aware of anything beyond the comforting presence of her captain beside her. Improving mankind didn't hold much appeal to her, but a real weather witch. She could be stronger, better, she could protect those she cared about. She wouldn't be a burden to Luffy anymore, she'd never lose anyone again, not if she could help it. Never again. Nami? Luffy's voice snapped Nami out of it, and his gaze communicated some form of sympathetic disapproval. As if he could sense her inner diatribe. You okay? Grounded. Nami turned to Haredes with a new sense of determination. You can analyze my Klimattact, she replied, focusing on Haredes as his face lit up with excitement. But it's broken right now. It runs on dials. So, I'll make a deal. You can study it all you want. Even make blueprints and create your own version. But first, you need to fix mine. The lightning pulse completely shattered. If you can repair it and give me upgrades to improve it, then you can do whatever you want with the blueprints. Hades went silent for a moment, stroking his beard in deep thought. Just as he was about to speak, Nami practically jumped as if struck by lightning, a sudden thought hitting her. Oh, and I want the patent in my crew's name. A sly grin was spread across her face. Nami didn't think the old men would approve of intellectual property theft after they had just credited the design to Usopp. And the account belonged to her anyway in a roundabout sense. So, she could still cash in. Her eyes gleamed with the thought of Barris, and Luffy burst into laughter, clutching his stomach at his navigator's antics. Hades lost a bit of his enthusiasm, but after a moment of consideration, he sighed. Very well, we have a deal. In an instant, the climate tact pieces were snatched away from her, and the weather wizard grinned down at them. So, shall we get started on fixing this? He finished his suggestion with a confident strut towards the small machine he had used to descend in the first place. As he was about to board, he glanced back at the group of Kuja watching him with curiosity, then turned his gaze towards the two Straw Hat Pirates. Well then, aren't you coming? Nami and Luffy's eyes widened, and they pointed to themselves, as if wondering whether Hades could be referring to someone else. The old man's nod was immediately followed by Luffy leaping from his spot to stand beside him, dancing in joy. Yeah, come on Nami. Let's go on an adventure. His arms stretched and coiled around his navigator, who didn't bother resisting as she was pulled into Luffy's chest with a fond smile. As Luffy climbed into the contraption, Hancock's sapphire eyes widened in shock. But, Luffy, where are you two going? Weren't y'all listening, Hammock? We're going on an adventure. Hancock swooned at his wide grin, gushing over his attempt to remember her name, though she didn't understand why she reacted that way. Nami sighed as she was pulled into the machine, trying to free herself from Luffy's coiled grip, but was slightly surprised by how little effort she made to do so. The navigator glanced towards the warlord and her citizens with a sheepish expression. Sorry for this. We'll be back as soon as we can. The machine rose mid-sentence, and Nami looked upwards in resignation, flopping into her seat as Luffy finally released her. How had she gotten into this mess? Nami was smart, and she prided herself on it. As such, she could appreciate the complexity and brilliance of this floating island the old man called Weatheria. Instinctively, her mind began doting facts and figures, which would allow her to draw a map later. The engineering behind this place. It was beyond belief. The contraption they were seated in docked with some kind of bubble room, and by now, Nami was sure her sanity had been left behind on Sabaody archipelago. The giant bubble surrounding the room acted as a shield for the arrival area, making the pressure differential irrelevant. Light green grass covered the floor, except for the white stone path that led from the smaller entrance bubble to a larger room. Nami glanced at the distant island, shocked by its beauty. An island traveling on a bubble seemed crazy, but now that she was seeing the engineering up close, she could understand it, though it still baffled her. Luffy twitched in excitement beside her, and Nami chuckled. That boy was so easily impressed. Outside the bubble, standing on part of the white stone walkway, Nami could make out a large group of individuals dressed identically to Hades. It was clear they were waiting for them. Nami could tell as much. As they docked, Nami easily heard the questions being shouted at them. Hey Hades, what happened down there? Who are these people? Do they have anything to do with the storm? Hades tried to keep the swarming crowd at bay while parking the flying contraption, lest he crush them under its weight. Luckily, after a brief moment, the long-bearded men calmed and allowed the machine to park. The bubble around the contraption dissipated, allowing Hades to properly address his fellows. Well, you see my comrades, these people are from the Blue Sea, and they've come to help us with our research. This here is the Weather Witch. Nami. The correction came quickly, and this here is her servant. Luffy. That correction came even quicker, though Luffy's nose-picking showed his lack of concern. They've given us a great challenge, Hades explained, ignoring the two pirates as he fished in his pockets. They have allowed us to study this device. With that, Hades pulled the climate tact pieces from his pockets to show his fellow other researchers whispered excitedly among themselves. If we can provide the required dials to fit in the machine and repair it to full capacity, we'll be able to keep the blueprints to this fascinating device, as well as the improved version. Perhaps, with this, manipulating the weather will be easier than ever. The other old men nodded in agreement, pleased with the arrangement. Is the woman the one your friend spoke of? A man with a light brown beard asked, staring at Nami in interest. The navigator tilted her head thoughtfully. Hadn't Haredes said he had been tasked by a stranger? Or was she misremembering? Her thoughts were interrupted by the brown-haired man approaching her, adjusting his hat with a sly wink. Why, hello hot stuff. The man couldn't finish his flirtatious introduction before Nami's hand struck him, sending him flying backwards. The other men gasped and slowly backed away from the navigator, fearing her sudden strength. Any of you got any of the same bright ideas? The navigator grit her teeth. Normally, she lapped up compliments, but not from weird old men. Not unless they had money, of course. The reply she received was satisfactory, the rapid, terrified shaking of heads. That's just how Philander is, another wizard piped up with a sigh. That fool is always flirting with women. And then, getting slapped by them. Haredes agreed with a nod, causing Nami to sigh while Luffy chuckled, slamming his fist into his palm in realization. Oh, so, he's just like Sanji then. Nami, do you remember that time we found Sanji tied to that bed after those Wome? Nami instantly interrupted him, slamming her fist onto Luffy's head to stop him from saying more. Though the memory was funny, she had to admit, especially given Sanji's expression when it was Zoro, of all people, who had found him Nikich limb. Haredes chuckled at their interaction, gesturing to a nearby elevator. Shall we begin repairing here? You called it a climate tact, correct? Nami nodded in response, following Haredes to the lift. Luffy, as usual, walked right next to her, laughing at the funny old man whose face was planted in the grass. It hadn't taken the two pirates long to reach Haredes' house, and it took even less time for Luffy to lose interest in Haredes' nonsensical explanation of how he intended to repair and upgrade the device. Nami seemed to be following along, and that was all that mattered. Luffy exited the house and lay down on the grass to gaze at the clear sky and distant storm in wonder. He could still hear the conversation inside the house, but it all sounded like gibberish to him. No, the cool dial inserts into the circuitry there, and connects to the main wiring once you lock it into place. Luffy missed the sunny. He missed being able to look at the horizon each morning and night. He missed the smell of the ocean and the rocking of the waves. They called to him, even now. Then, if I'm right, the dial should work by pressing this button, right, Weather Witch. Would the others be looking at the same sky right now? Would they run into Nami's storm? He hoped they'd know it was them who made it, so they'd know they were all right. Where did they end up? He hoped the places were at least cool. Unlike him and Nami, they were on their own. His stomach twisted at the thought, but he calmed himself. They'd find each other, no matter what. It works. Nami's excited cry came from within Haredes' house, and Luffy instantly turned at the sound. Through the doorway, he could see his navigator jumping and dancing in joy, holding the cool pole in her hand. Luffy beamed at the sight. Ah, it was that mystery thing again. I think this piece is back to normal now, Nami concluded, twirling it deftly in her hand with relief. You should see if it works again. Luffy called, though his mind was still focused on his crew and something else. From inside the house, Nami didn't notice his distracted state and nodded in agreement. Okay then, here we go, she called, twirling the piece in her hand to generate a cool breeze, which soon encompassed her. Without a moment's fault, she disappeared, her cheer of success ringing out over the area. Alright, the mirage power is still working pretty well. Luffy smiled at that, springing up to look around for his navigator, only to see the empty area and Haredes' fascinated expression. Nami? Where'd ya go? Luffy's head turned from side to side in search of her, and the laughter that followed briefly infuriated him. Then he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He listened, but more importantly, he felt. The world faded around him until he felt something behind him, a spark of Nami. The color orange. Tangerines. The stars and the moon, and that mystery. His arm shot out like a cobra, snaking around what appeared to be air to the observing Haredes, until the mirage faded and the navigator was pulled into the beaming Luffy's chest. Rather than annoyed, Nami was shocked for once, staring at her captain's face in surprise. "How did you know I was there?" Nami practically gawped, her jaw nearly dropping as she stared at Luffy's simple expression, as if she had just asked him the time. "Huh? I always know where you are, idiot, she. His laugh was met by a stunned expression from the orange-haired pirate, who stared at him in awe. Luffy stopped laughing after a moment, staring back into Nami's eyes intently. Nami could have gasped. There it was again, that seemingly psychic connection. Now, all she had to do was grasp it in. Hey, Haredes yelled, looking out of the window with wide eyes. The spell shattered instantly, with both Nami and Luffy staring at the old man from their coiled position with owlish expressions. Did you just make a mirage around yourself? Nami, about to respond, suddenly remembered her proximity to her captain, coiled against his chest. She stared at her captain with a deadpan expression, ignoring the feeling of his breath on her neck as she grit her teeth. Luffy. You huh? His face met the floor with a resounding thud, causing him to whine petulantly. Nami untangled herself from his arm and turned to Haredes with a curious expression. Yeah, the climate tact allows me to make mirages. Can't you guys do that? Haredes looked almost offended. Of course we can. We students of Weatheria are masters of weather. We discovered that ability a long time ago, but it never seemed useful to us, so it's become a lost idea. His sad tone might have earned sympathy from the navigator if not for her confusion. Really, you can't find a use for it at all? Her voice was sarcastic beyond measure. What do you man? Haredes was practically leaning through the windowsill, nearly tipping over. Nami raised an eyebrow, wondering if he really was that clueless. The people on the island below were confused and terrified by a floating island in the sky. Don't you think you could use a mirage on the base of the Weatheria and its sides to prevent panic whenever you visit any island? Haredes stroked his beard thoughtfully. He hadn't considered that. Fascinating, I see, what an excellent idea. We do have quite a few cool dials to spare. We could certainly use them for that. The old man exited his house with a spring in his step, practically skipping towards the captain and navigator. I'll go discuss the situation with the other weather scientists, and together, we'll sort out the mirage in about an hour or so. You might want to head back down to the surface and talk things over with that lovely snake princess. She did seem upset we were here, and we still want to study the calm belt. Haredes turned to Luffy with a pleading expression. Do you think you could speak on our behalf, young man? And arrange our stay at the island, as well as its study? Luffy picked his nose, confused as to why the old man was asking him, but nodded anyway. He was stopped from following by his navigator, who grabbed his arm. Hold it, how do I know you won't take off with my climate tact as soon as we leave? You flew here. I wouldn't be able to get it back if you flew away. Haredes blinked, stroking his beard as he thought it over. I don't think it's that simple. His admission came with slight nervousness. You see, this island is powered by the wind. And, well, we're in the calm belt right now, which, as you know, has no wind at all. We can't simply leave whenever we want. My friend, who brought us here, said he'll return when he's able to take our call. I'm not sure when or how that will happen, though. Nami let her suspicious stare drop, smiling at the weather scientist. He seemed sincere, if nothing else. All right then, I'll believe you. But if you pull any funny business, I swear, leaving the calm belt will be the least of your worries. The old man shivered at Nami's threat and decided to stroll towards the elevator for his own safety. Come on, I'll take you back down. Nami nodded in response and walked ahead of him, determined to finally put the day to rest. But it was Luffy who, for once, was more insightful on this occasion, a rare sight indeed. Who is this friend of yours, old guy? Haredes paused for a moment, taking time to conjure his answer. I don't know his name. He visited this island many years ago to cure an affliction his daughter had. A girl named Bonnie. Sapphire scales, a rare and deadly disease. Sadly, we couldn't help him. His tone was regretful, as if the matter kept him up at night. What does he look like then? Luffy persisted, his curiosity rising as he stroked his chin. This old man sure was funny, after all. He wondered if Chopper knew about those sapphire things. Well, he's a large man with bushy hair in a cloak, and the kindest of smiles. Oh. And he wears an oddly shaped hat. The old man recalled the information fondly, looking ahead as if picturing the person he was describing. A K and long bushy hair? An oddly shaped hat? Could it be? But a kind smile? Luffy stopped thinking, shrugging as his mind came up blank. He needed to stop thinking so hard. To its credit, the palace of Amazon Lily was bright and vibrant with color, even with the sun fading over the horizon. Luffy and Nami remained silent under Hancock's questioning stare, having relayed the information to the Snake Princess, who was clearly displeased by the growing complexity of the situation. "Allow me to set the matter straight," Hancock began, desperately trying to maintain her composure in the room where she had bared herself to the two of them mere hours ago. "Your weather machine went haywire and caused a storm, which you dispersed, though not before it damaged Amazon Lily. Then, a strange man appeared, with whom you've made a deal to repair your device. Not only does this mean he'll be staying within my kingdom, but these men also wish to study and communicate with us. And finally, because of all this, you both wish to stay on my island longer than we initially agreed?" Both Luffy and Nami nodded in response, shattering Hancock's mask of calm as she stood from her throne in a flash. The sheer disrespect. "You've caused chaos and damage to my island, battled my sisters, created a storm, made a deal with magical weather mages, who now live above us on an invisible floating island. Want to allow these men to communicate with us in violation of tradition, and on top of all that, you wish to stay longer than we first agreed?" Another nod. "I see. You're taking advantage of my kindness. Give me one reason I should even agree to these terms." The Snake Princess's bellow could have torn the walls down, but Nami stayed silent. She knew they were asking too much, but they didn't have much choice in the matter. She couldn't afford to leave Amazon Lily without her weapon, and if the deal worked, she could grow much stronger too. They also couldn't afford to upset the scientists now that they had her claim attacked, and there was potential monetary gain to be made too. Thankfully, Luffy had already acted, dropping to his knees and bowing before the warlord, just as Vivi had once instructed. "Please Hammock," his plea was desperate. "We really need your help. We've got no way of leaving and Nami's claim attacked is really important to her. And, ya know, those old geezers aren't so bad, they won't hurt you, I promise. Could you please help us? I promise we'll be good, and that they'll be good. We'll do anything to make it up to you, I pinky promise." Hancock was stunned by his humble plea and felt her knees give way beneath her. No one had ever had an effect like this on her before. She nearly lost her footing, barely managing to stay upright. A small blush crept onto her cheeks, and a pant escaped her lips, as if she'd just fought a day-long battle. Her stutter was unbecoming, and she knew it, but she couldn't help it. She gazed down at the pirate in uncertainty, while he looked up at her with a focused, committed gaze. Hancock could have fainted right then and there. "Please," Luffy's murmur was quiet, but it might as well have shattered the warlord's eardrums, as she turned a deep, dark crimson. I will allow it, but any communication between the wizards and Amazon Lily must occur on their island. They may not set foot on our grounds." Hancock had to force herself to turn away from the raven-haired pirate. "Really?" Luffy's announcement brimmed with happiness as a face-splitting grin appeared on his face. "Thank you so much." A small smile crept onto Hancock's face, and her chest began to ache. But it was a good ache. Strange. Nami, however, was left speechless by the turn of events, glancing at her captain in curiosity. Luffy had always been magnetic and insanely charismatic in his own Luffy way, but this was absurd. He really had the luck of the devil. The navigator allowed a beaming smile to cross her face alongside Luffy's. Of course, it was Sandersonia who burst through the doors at the far end of the room, ready to make the situation worse yet again. The three turned to her in confusion as the Snake Sister sprinted across the room, nearly crashing to a kneeling position beside the two Straw Hat pirates. "Forgive me, sister, but it was that man, the one whose crew you petrified. He demanded escort and entry to the island. He threatened us with the presence of the Admiralty if we didn't let him come to the palace. Mari is bringing him as we speak. We tried to contact you, but we got no response. I apologize, sister." Her tone was pleading, panicked, and rushed. Hancock would have been furious at allowing a man to step foot on their island, but the precedent had already been broken twice today. If there was ever a day for anyone to falter, it was today. Besides, a threat from the Admiralty? Normally, Hancock wouldn't care. But 3 times today her powers hadn't worked as expected. Especially when that old man had managed to tear his eyes away from her. If her abilities were weakening, she couldn't risk that with the likes of a Navy admiral. Hancock sighed and straightened her spine. Calm down, Sonia. I will handle the matter. The warlord turned to the 2 pirates, panic barely restrained. Luffy, Weather Witch, hide behind the curtains. Sonia, conceal them. Her command was met with an angry murmur from Nami about being called Weather Witch. But Nami accepted the order nonetheless, grabbing Luffy's hand and pulling him behind her. The 2 slipped behind the pink curtain, Sonia pulling it closed once they were fully concealed. The Kuja pirate closed the rest of the curtains in the room to make it seem intentional and reduce suspicion. Just in time, the door slammed open, revealing Marigold and a tall marine beside her. The man had a small, dark brown mustache under his nose and a short mohawk on top of his head. He wore a light purple and white pinstripe suit, with a long, flowing naval jacket draped over his shoulders. Nami peered through the curtains with Luffy, panic written across her face. This man, he was a Navy officer, and judging by the reaction, he wasn't someone low on the ladder. Boa Hancock, his voice was grizzled and worn, but impeccably professional. Thank you for permitting this meeting. Permitting? Hancock's reply was angry, emerging through gritted teeth. You threatened me with a visit from the Admiralty? In violation of our treaty? I've told you before, I will not fight in your war. No man shall ever set foot on my island. Leave now. The mustached man stayed silent for a moment, then slowly pulled a transponder snail from his inner suit pocket, glancing around the room as he did so. The kingdom of Amazon Lily has beauty beyond words. His words, though kind, were a threat, and he made no effort to hide it. Shall I call Admiral Akainu to visit? I'm sure he would appreciate the recommendation. Sonia and Marigold gasped while Hancock growled. The mustached man smiled, his point made clear, as he gave a respectful bow. Once again, I am Vice Admiral Momonga. A pleasure. Nami shuddered at the thought. A Navy Vice Admiral. That was the same rank as Luffy's grandfather. As a representative of Navy headquarters, I must call upon your duty as one of the 7 warlords of the sea to aid the Marines in their time of need. You will join our forces, or we will remove your title, as I stated earlier. In that course of action, I would not recommend. A loud, muffled shout caught Momonga's attention, and he turned to look at one of the pink curtains. But it remained still and silent. Hancock's eyes followed, and her heart skipped a beat. Very well, she had been defeated. Besides, as long as he didn't find Luffy and the Weather Witch, a traitorous voice whispered in her head, she could go to war over that. What would you have me do? Don't do it, Hammock. Kick this Marine's ass. Luffy tried desperately to yell in protest for his new friend, but Nami's hand clamped firmly over his mouth, muffling him completely. Lu farcially into his ear, holding his struggling form. She has to play along with their game for now. I was here when she first heard about this war, and Nyan said if she refused, they'd put the whole island in danger. You need to let her do this. Nami, perhaps the best person to calm him given her sway over her captain, felt Luffy's struggling cease as he gave a reluctant nod. Well, Momonga continued, evident relief in his tone at Hancock's agreement. It appears the war has been postponed due to a freak storm. A storm that seems to be avoiding your island like the plague. Luffy and Nami exchanged shocked glances but said nothing. They could guess what the Vice Admiral was referring to. Our methods and techniques are of no concern to you. Hancock's drawl was met with silence from Momonga, who merely stared at her with narrowed eyes. But in a few weeks, after the storm has passed, you will accompany me to Marineford to help defend the execution grounds. Do you agree to these terms, Boa Hancock? Nami could tell from Hancock's breathing that she was furious, unimaginably so. But what else could she do? She was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Luffy furrowed his brows. The Navy was going to war. Why? Over an execution. Who was going to be executed? Gramps was strong. But would he be okay? Luffy listened more intently, hoping to find something to dispel his worry for his grandpa. Even if Gramps was mean and hit him all the time, Luffy still loved him, quite dearly, and he didn't want him to die. Fine. I'll fight in this war of yours, without reservation, Hancock concluded bitterly, interrupting Luffy's thoughts as the two pirates behind the curtain could practically hear Momonga's smug smile. Excellent. Peering through the gap in the curtain, they could spy the Marine's annoying smirk. Of course, if I am to report this cooperation, I will need fresh supplies for my ship. And, in addition, I will need to dock my ship off the coast of your island after my men are unpetrified. I won't allow myself or any of my men to set foot on your island, but we'll need to escape the storm's reach. Nami clenched her fists. This vice admiral was really pushing his luck, but Hancock couldn't refuse his request. What a... Very well. Hancock's rage made the vice admiral take a brief step back, though it was so quick it might as well not have happened. I shall do as you wish, but in return, the Navy will pay reparations and concessions for initially violating the treaty our agreement is based on. Momonga shifted as he considered his options. Very well, Pirate Empress. I will not set foot on this island any longer, and I will contact headquarters about reparations once you revive my men in the morning. Hancock nodded angrily, stewing in her rage. The day felt unending to her. One blow to her pride after another. She wished for it to end. Then, the matter is settled. Momonga seemed gleeful, his mission a success. I shall contact you at the agreed time, and then, Boa Hancock, you will allow us to escort you to Marineford. Luffy and Nami breathed a sigh of relief, glad the Vice Admiral was leaving, but Momonga wasn't finished. And from there, you will witness and assist in the execution of Portgas d'Ace. Luffy froze. He didn't move, he didn't breathe. He didn't notice Momonga leaving the room. He didn't even feel Nami place a hand on his shoulder. Nami turned to him, her eyes wide with horror, but mostly concerned for her captain, and for Ace. After all, she knew him, too, to some extent. Luffy, Ace is, she began. But Luffy cut her off with a simple nod. He had wanted to know who would be executed, but now, he just felt empty. Luffy shivered and clenched his fists so tightly that it drew blood, which dripped from his fingers onto the floor. Nami pressed her hand more firmly into his shoulder, trying to catch his eyes, but they were hidden beneath his hat. Luffy's left hand reached up to his mouth, and he bit into his skin, drawing more blood in a desperate bid to stay quiet and not alert the Vice Admiral of their presence. Before he could rip a chunk of flesh from his hand, he felt Nami's hand cup his cheek, the other moving from his shoulder to gently pull his hand away from his mouth. Luffy felt himself relax, if only a little, as Nami pressed her forehead to his. Luffy's mind raced, but he focused on the rhythm of Nami's breathing, and slowly his own began to sync with it. He leaned his forehead more firmly into hers, hoping it would calm his thoughts. But all Luffy felt was a rising panic that threatened to overwhelm him. Ace, he didn't notice the small tears falling from his face, not until Nami's thumbs wiped them away, her right hand brushing against his scar tissue in what should have been a comforting sensation. But, in that moment, Luffy felt nothing. He let his head drop from Nami's to rest on his navigator's shoulder, her arms immediately wrapping around him in response. The embrace was tight, but so utterly comforting that Luffy was simply glad, of all people, to have Nami here with him. Luffy tried to wake himself from the nightmare he was trapped in, but to no avail. Ace, what happened to you? Part 1. Zoro and Perona's fierce battle. Shit, that was fast. Zoro seethed, dodging out of the way of the blade that sliced into his cheek. The familiar trickle of blood on his skin instantly activating every killer instinct the swordsman possessed. Leaping into the air, Zoro quickly realized his mistake, as he was forced to parry attacks from this mysterious creature he struggled to keep up with. Sensing another attack emerging behind him, the swordsman spun in the air, blocking an offending sword with Wado, grabbing the flat end of his blade to gather the strength needed to block the strike. The resulting force sent the Straw Hat combatant spiraling to the ground, though he quickly righted himself, skidding across the floor and struggling against the force before coming to a halt. Ahead, he could hear the Ghost Girl's gasps and almost pantomime-esque reactions, and the moss-haired pirate grit his teeth. Couldn't she help at all? The wind around Zoro howled, and the swordsman briefly wondered if she would refrain from flying in fear of being blown away. No matter, straightening his back, Zoro swung Wado through the air, an air-compressed slash emerging that careened towards the creature attacking him, only for it to dissipate against the creature's own swing. Zoro hadn't put everything into that attack, especially given his injuries, but for it to be so casually tossed aside. Damn it, whoever they are, they're strong. Perona pointed behind him in a panic, terrified as an earlier strike had nearly removed her head, and Zoro pivoted to see what had frightened her. Above, on a higher piece of rubble, sat some kind of ape-like creature pulling a sword from the stone, its fur billowing in the powerful gale. And behind it, several more of the same creatures, all wielding weapons and resembling demons in the fog that was slowly dissipating due to the approaching storm. Perona let out another scream, taking several steps back, while Zoro quickly raised Watto to his mouth to draw his other two swords. Listen, think you can cover my back and provide some kind of support? I don't think we're surviving if we split up. His question, though he wasn't facing Perona, was evidently received, and the ghost girl calmed down somewhat. It didn't take long for a smirk to cross Perona's face, as several ghosts emerged from her palms, making the swordsman's eyes narrow as he heard their repeated use of the word negative. So help him, if even one of those things touched him, she was dead. The ghost girl took several steps forward, falling into rank right behind him, covering his flank. Fine, I suppose I could lend a hand. After all, these things aren't cute at all. And with the Straw Hat Pirate charging forward towards the horde of monsters, Zoro and Perona's team-up began. The Vice Admiral continued to glare at the transponder snail on the bar top, wishing it would just disappear. Though given how much she had drunk already, it looked as if there were 3 of them before her. Delayed. The damn affair was delayed. Why did it have to be delayed? Thank God it was delayed, a traitorous voice whispered in her head. Captain McHarding, probably her oldest friend in the Marine Corps, sat beside her, gazing with a sympathy she despised. A storm raged in her chest as she gripped the bottle of whiskey so hard that it would have shattered if not for her appreciation of the drink itself. She swirled the contents once before taking another unprofessional swig. She didn't know if the lack of judgment from her men made her feel better or worse. The other Marines in the establishment, given it was a bar within a naval base, did look at her with cold judgment but didn't seem to care too much. They had received the same report as she had and scrambled to finish their drinks quickly so they could make their way to Eni's lobby as ordered. The reminder made her grit her teeth in anger, the sound of her enamel grinding eliciting a concerned look from her right-hand man. Her plan had been flawless. Stay on this island, get drunk to the point where she couldn't show up to the battle and potentially ruin the careers of her men. Pirate. 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 He was a pirate, experiencing the consequences of his own actions. The mantra repeated in her head. She shook her head desperately, not wanting to think about it, a task that was instantly met with failure. All she could do was think about it. She had grappled with the idea of committing treason ever since the initial announcement had come through weeks ago, and the Vice Admiral had shown no hesitation in explaining her plight to her men. She trusted them all with her life, to the point that keeping her cards close to her chest was never up for consideration. Her decisions affected them, and she would not let them be dragged into her mess. She had initially been advised to just stay out of it, defy her orders but not cause trouble. They had all stubbornly remained at her side, but had grown quieter lately. It was probably because they were beginning to doubt her and her mild treason. Yeah, that was probably it. You really oughta lay off the drink, Issy. I know it's the plan we sorted to keep her conscience clear, but it ain't exactly doin' her health no favors. The lads ain't seein' you like this, they do. In fact, I've heard they've got something they wanna say to ya. Michael's accent emerged thick, and the Vice Admiral had nothing but a fondness for it. Though she could do without the nickname, she focused on that instead of the idea that her men had a damning statement for her. His response could have elicited a snort. To criticize her for drinking, with his gambling problem, she should have slapped him around the back of the head. George McHarding, or as she called him, Mac, was practically her best friend. They had entered the Marines at the same time, and he had stuck with her through everything she had gone through. Once she had received her promotion to Vice Admiral and been placed in control of the 19th Squadron under Admiral Aokiji's battle group, Mac had immediately requested a transfer of his 13th line to her unit, and the rest was history. She took another swig in protest of Mac's criticism, and the man sighed. Honestly, it was more than likely he was actually upset about not being able to drink with her, considering he was flat broke. Her friend had never been good with money, considering his, frankly traumatic, childhood. She would have bought him one if he didn't already owe her hundreds of thousands of berries. She loved him to death, but she had to admit he was a bit of a bum. Still, he was the best friend anyone could ask for, if a bit reserved at times. You've been on the bev non-stop since that report about the delay came through. Changed her mind, haven't you, yaw? Her head drooped instantly as she was reminded of her current plight. The stupid storm had ruined everything. Keep her men out of trouble because their foolish leader couldn't control her emotions. That was all that had kept her going over the last couple of weeks, through the endless debates about what she should do. But since the announcement today, all she could think was that it was a sign from some kind of divine power, telling her to do something, to stand up to what she knew was an injustice. That's what her heart had been screaming to her, which was why she was drowning it in alcohol. A snarl escaped her lips. What the hell should she do? She was back to square one, at war with herself over a shadow that threatened to consume her whole. Normally, she would ask herself what he would do, but she didn't want to think about that now, given that he was the source of her current predicament. Fucked. She was fucked. She lifted the bottle again, but Mac's hand intercepted hers, gripping the glass firmly. The Vice Admiral went to yell at him, but her words caught in her throat as she stared at the determined look on her friend's face, a wide smile spreading across it. You missin' my point, Issy. The ship's ready. The lads can't stand seeing ya torture yourself like this. They've been kick-adjustin' that plan in the first place. What the hell was he talking about? Her heart shuddered with anticipation. Surely, he couldn't mean. So, they've already made up their minds. They're headin' to impel down whether y'all like it or not. The question is, are y'all comin' with him? The Vice Admiral stared at him in shock, her jaw slack as the bottle slipped from her hands, luckily still held by her friend to prevent it from falling to the floor. The men, they were doing all that for her. Tears welled in her eyes, emotions overwhelming her as relief filled her being. Each and every one of their faces appeared in her mind, and a small smile crossed her face as she tried to regain control of her emotions. Those idiots. Knew you were in there somewhere. Come on, Issy. You and me are bustin' Portgas d-ace outta impel down. And with that, a wide, beaming smile crossed Vice Admiral Isuka's face, her back straightening as her expression returned to a mask of calm and determination. Her sword felt heavy on her hip, but in a way that she relished. Her internal plight was over, thanks to the insight of her wonderful subordinates. She stood, her resolve hardening as she headed for the door, Mac following right behind her without hesitation. It was time to get to work. Explain, Luffy yelled at the top of his voice, desperately throwing himself from his hiding spot as soon as Vice Admiral Momonga had left. Tell me everything. His dark gray eyes were watering, and his bottom lip quivered as he could hardly keep himself together. Nami was close behind him, her worried eyes trained on him. He needed her support now, more than ever. Hancock turned to the pirate captain with a glare, shocked by his brash display. Her cheeks had briefly flushed red at the sight of him, but they quickly returned to normal as she processed his words. Excuse me, her anger from the interaction with the Navy officer lingered, frustration coiling in her body. She had been far too patient for far too long. This man, she didn't know why, but he put her at such ease, so much so that she had forgotten that she demanded respect. But even now, as she glared at him, her heartbeat thundered a rapid melody in her chest, and she had to stifle her reaction with great effort. This had happened several times now, falling into emotion's spiderweb. She would not falter, not when she had been disrespected time and time again. Ace! The raven-haired teen shouted back at her, uncaring of the title she commanded and the power she held. What's happening to Ace? That guy said there was an execution. Where? When? Why? The bombardment of questions allowed Hancock to ignore her own complicated emotions completely, her anger rising at the practically hyperventilating boy. Excuse me, need I remind you, you are a guest in my home? How dare you treat me with such disrespect? There was still a red tint to her cheeks, one that she didn't notice. Nami, however, quickly stepped in front of Luffy, realizing that her captain was in no state to handle even a simple conversation. Please, forgive him. Nami's plea was desperate, her hands placed together respectfully. Ace is his big brother. Please, tell him about Ace. At that, Hancock's eyes widened like dinner plates as the reality of the situation dawned on her and her anger faded. Please, Luffy's voice emerged as a mumble, lacking any of the determination or willpower that had so transfixed Hancock, as the boy's tears threatened to fall again. Ace is my only brother. I've gotta help him. Hancock thought of her own sisters then, recalling her memories of desperation in the face of monsters. For some reason, the memory hurt her a little less now, if only slightly. Portgas D. Ace is your brother? Hancock was almost surprised by the deep sorrow in her voice, but Luffy nodded all the same. I apologize, then. The Fire Fist was captured by the newest recruit to the 7 Warlords of the Sea. Marshal D. Teach, though he operates under a different alias, known as Blackbeard. Blackbeard? Nami mumbled, thinking back to their interactions with Ace on Alabasta. She turned to Luffy to clarify, perhaps for him, perhaps for herself. That was the guy Ace went looking for because he betrayed Whitebeard, right? Luffy, however, ignored her, gritting his teeth as he stared at the floor, his fists tightening in anger. Ace would never lose to someone else. The words hardly managed to escape his lips behind his rage. Ace is strong. He wouldn't be beaten so easily by a bastard like that Blackbeard guy. While I have not met this Blackbeard, the fact of the matter is that he did beat your brother. Through what methods, I cannot say, Hancock responded, uncharacteristically patient with the boy before her. Sympathy for the raven-haired pirate filling every part of her being. It's a lie, Luffy interrupted with a loud shout, his foot crashing onto the floor. Ace could never lose to anyone. This time, however, Luffy seemed to catch his rude behavior, hanging his head in shame as Beppo would and mumbling a small apology. Hancock remained silent this time, nodding in understanding. Her sisters would likely react the same way on her behalf if, by some impossible chance, she too were defeated. He is being executed at Marineford in 1 month's time, as you likely overheard. It was to be sooner, but I believe you're Weatherwitch. Nami, the navigator corrected, and Hancock instinctively cast a scowl in her direction but continued nonetheless. Nami had something to do with that. My guess is that the freak storm created by that contraption of hers is responsible, Hancock clarified. The magic wand thing. Kleem attacked, Nami corrected once again, and the tick mark that appeared on Hancock's forehead was plainly visible but disappeared as soon as it arrived. Whatever it is, Hancock tried to ignore the swirl of emotions regarding the Weather Witch, instead focusing on Luffy. The storm likely breached beyond the borders of the calm belt, and given the tub current's proximity, it has likely completely shut down Navy movements. As such, the execution has been delayed. Luffy's head snapped up immediately, determination set on his face. Where's Marineford? Hancock blinked in shock at the question, wondering just what the boy was planning. He couldn't possibly mean. You're not planning on going there, are you? Hancock hardly wanted to go herself, and she was far stronger than this pirate boy who intrigued her so. My brother's there, Luffy said simply, his mind already made up. Would you try to stop the execution of one of your sisters? Hancock didn't even need to think about the question. Of course, she would. No matter the circumstances. The idea of that scenario exhausted her, on top of all the other matters of the day that had compounded, and she knew there was no use continuing the discussion while everyone was exhausted. It is too late to discuss these matters, Hancock reasoned, leaning back into her throne in an attempt to relax and distress. The day has been long, and I am sure both of you are quite tired. Believe me, I am as well. I recommend the two of you go to sleep, and we'll discuss it further in the morning. Luffy's eyes widened in complete disbelief. No, this is about Ace, I want to talk about it now. Before Hancock could argue back, Nami stepped in, her hand resting on his shoulder in a way that twisted the warlord's stomach. Luffy, we have a month until the execution. We're going to rescue Ace, no matter what. But we can't even begin to do that as tired as we are. What if it was Nojiko? Luffy snapped, turning to her with a glare. She, of all people, should understand. What was she trying to pull? His mind clouded with rage, unable to think critically or regard his navigator properly. Would you wait until morning? I would if I was as tired as you, Nami countered, not cowering under his anger. In fact, she met it, sizing him up with a partial glare as she crossed her arms. What? I'm fine. The captain persisted, slightly relenting to yawn. We need to ACT now. We have time to discuss this later, Luffy. Hancock's sigh caused the captain to round on her, anger and resistance rising again as she continued. "Get some rest now. You need it." "I'm not," Luffy started to shout at the top of his lungs, but Nami nudged him with her shoulder, and in his exhaustion, he nearly tumbled to the ground. As he lost balance, Nami pulled him back up by the lapels of his vest, her teeth grit in anger. "Luffy," her voice emerged in a harsh whisper, and Luffy could practically hear the lack of room for argument, already feeling his anger fade as he felt the urge to shut his ears. He didn't want to listen to Nami, he didn't want her to start making sense. "Listen, I want to save Ace as much as you do. But look at how exhausted you are. You're beaten and bruised, hardly able to stand. If we want to rescue Ace and, as you said, go to Marineford, you can't do it as you are now. It won't be as easy as breaking Robin out of Eni's lobby." Protest wormed its way into Luffy's throat, his eyes defiant but losing their edge. "But we saved Robin. Eni's lobby had an entire army there, and we won. I'll go to Marineford right now and win if I have to, no matter what." Nami had enough of his stubbornness, her anger rising as she contextualized the situation they were in. She didn't want to say what she was about to say, but Luffy gave her no choice. "What? Like you won at Sabaody?" Instantly, Luffy's breath caught in his throat, his eyes widening as he looked at Nami in horror. She didn't mean that. Guilt wormed its way through his entire being as he searched desperately for blame in Nami's eyes, the blame he so feared. But instead, all he found was understanding, as usual. Nami's grip tightened around Luffy's vest, irrationally afraid he would spite her for saying it. But she desperately looked into his eyes, communicating all the care and worry she held for him, as well as a determination to match his own. "We will rescue Ace. No matter what. But do not lie to me and say we're ready to go to Marineford, exhausted as we are. Not after that." Luffy seemed to calm, words from his navigator long ago echoing in his head, the night after Logatown. He let out a desperate sigh and instantly felt the energy leave his body. Nami was right, as usual. Still, thoughts of Ace plagued his mind. "Promise me." Dark gray eyes met brown ones in an emotional connection they could achieve with no other. "Promise me we'll talk about this tomorrow." The navigator smiled, nodding as she let go of his vest and fondly placed the hat dangling from his neck atop his head. "I promise. Besides, rest will do us good. We need to think about all our options. The crew's still missing, after all, but now we have a new priority." Luffy looked at her, amused as he finally calmed. "Well, as best he could, at least. Thanks, Nami." The navigator flicked his nose, causing his face to scrunch and his eyes to cross as he tried to track the movement. "Anytime, idiot." She laughed, and Luffy could feel the small smile spread across his face as Nami turned to face Hancock, who was staring at the two pirates with a peculiar expression. The Empress didn't know how to react to the interaction between the two, strange feelings emerging in her chest. Perhaps the clearest ones she had felt all day. Eventually, Hancock chose to ignore everything again, or perhaps, do the opposite, and smiled back. "Marigold," she yelled, alerting her sister who was waiting at the door. "Escort Luffy and the witch to a guest room." Nami didn't protest the name this time, too tired, as the large, orange-haired woman led the two pirates away from the royal throne room. Once they were out of sight, Hancock's composure dropped instantly, and she clutched her heart as if trying to rip it from her chest. The Snake Princess felt her temperature spike, and sweat began to pour from every pore. What was happening to her? This had only started after she noticed how differently she was acting around Luffy and tried to stop it. Every part of her body ached as if a great strain had been placed upon it. Why? Why did she feel such pain? She shook her head, groaning at the sensation of whiplash. Rest. She just needed rest. With a small groan, the Snake Princess pushed herself up from her throne, staggered slightly, and then practically limped towards her bedroom. Little did the warlord know, things would get much worse before they could possibly get better. "Here is your room," Marigold announced, opening a large red set of ornamental doors. Nami followed her inside, stunned by the sight of the accommodation. The guest room looked nearly as pristine and regal as the main throne room. The walls were still covered in the golden color she now associated with Amazon Lily's palace. The crimson pillars from the throne room also decorated the corners of their new quarters, and light pink drapes, which Nami had also spotted in the throne room, surrounded the bed. Wait a second? Nami did a double take, her brain working overtime. Something wasn't right. The red pillars? No, they were grand but well placed. The golden-colored wall? A bit overdone, but very soothing for her eyes. No, that wasn't it. The bed? No, it looked extraordinarily comfortable. The pillows were fluffed like clouds, and those sheets looked smooth as silk. Quite frankly, she couldn't wait to crash and sleep on it. The drapes? No, how could it be the drap? Wait. The bed? Bed as in the singular of beds. The pin dropped as Nami's brain finally figured out what had been bothering her. The third highest IQ in the East Blue had taken too long to come to the conclusion. There was only one bed in the room. She and Luffy were expected to sleep in the same bed. So, this is our room? Nami mumbled, and Marigold nodded in confirmation. Are you sure there isn't another one available? Instantly, the Snake Sister's kind smile faded, replaced by embarrassment. You don't like it? Damn, that wasn't what she wanted her to think. Nami quickly waved her hands in front of her face, insisting otherwise. No, it's not that, it's just, the bed. Luffy tilted his head to the side, frowning in confusion as he tried to figure out what Nami was seeing that he wasn't. It looks comfy to me. The bed isn't the problem, the navigator reasoned, surprised by Marigold's lack of realization. It's just that, there's only one. Luffy shook his head in mock disapproval, and Nami felt a well of anger rise in her throat. Don't be greedy, Nami. The captain flopped onto the bed with a pleasant sigh, while Nami suppressed her growing rage. Marigold merely glanced between the two before simply shrugging. What's wrong? It seemed she wasn't quite up to speed on the issue Nami was noticing. He's my captain, Nami whispered into Marigold's ear before another fact of the situation came to mind. And he's not the most settled sleeper. Besides, we mostly sleep separately from the guys in. Nami's protest slowly died down in her throat. The guys. They weren't here to help Luffy with what he was going through. Wasn't that what she had promised herself? To look after her captain and not let him down? Zoro and the others weren't here to support him. It was just her. She didn't want to leave him with his thoughts tonight, not on this night. Nami knew Luffy better than nearly everyone, and she knew how much he hated being alone. Nothing scared him more. How could she subject him to that, knowing he would feel it now more than ever? With a final sigh of concession, she looked at Marigold with a masked expression of gratitude. It's nothing, Marigold. Thank you very much for the room, Nami reassured, and the woman seemed comforted by this, relieved their offered quarters were satisfactory. With that, the large Snake Sister walked out, shutting the doors behind her. Nami kept her gaze locked on the door for a moment before turning back to her captain and the bed. With a few swift steps, and the captain's eyes glued, stepped over him and, without a word, lay down next to him on the bed. For a moment, silence encompassed the two, so strong and tense that neither spoke, fearing the fragile silence would be broken. This was very unlike Luffy. Nami had only seen him like this once before, after the fight with Usopp. The silence itself felt turbulent. Nami alternated between glancing at her captain in concern from the corner of her eye and returning to an awkward internal monologue about their arrangement. The pillows were amazing, she had to admit, and it felt fantastic to settle onto a comfortable bed. But that didn't change the awkwardness of the current sleeping arrangement. Luffy, of course, didn't seem particularly concerned or awkward about her presence. He was merely subdued, just like he had been at Water 7. Luffy rarely cried in front of others. Instead, he was as he was now, in a quiet moment of rare thought, as if in a state of mourning. Nami shook the thought from her head. She didn't want to think about death, especially in light of Ace's situation. The arrangement continued like this for hours, though to Nami, they felt like minutes. The silence was broken by the captain, whose face had morphed into a frown of concern. Nami. His voice was a whisper, so subtle she could have mistaken it for ambient noise. Yeah? Her reply came almost instantly, as if she had been waiting for him to speak, and she turned slightly to catch sight of her captain from the corner of her eye. You can go to sleep, if you want. Luffy insisted, evidently worried about her. Nami let a smile cross her face. That old. I will in a bit. I'm just thinking. About what? Luffy turned his head fully to face her, and Nami could instantly see how much his thoughts were plaguing him. It was clear he was trying to get his mind off Ace and was failing miserably. Just about, things. What things? Nami's brow furrowed slightly as she tried to dodge the subject. Shouldn't you be going to sleep as well? After all, you took the most damage today. There was a pause, enough that Nami had to wonder if he had fallen asleep. I can't sleep. Nami debated how she should handle the situation, her heart filled with sympathy for her best friend as she stared at him with a frown. But deep down, Nami knew what she needed to do, and what she wanted to do. With Luffy, she always knew what she needed to do. He was Luffy after all. And with that, Nami sat up a bit more so her upper back rested against the pillows before her arms snaked out and grabbed her captain, who made a noise of protest but didn't seem too surprised. Eventually, Nami pulled him against her, so his head rested just under her chest, her arms wrapped around his shoulders. She wouldn't charge him, not this time. A wry smile briefly crossed her face at the thought, but she focused primarily on her captain, who looked up at her with a quizzical expression. Tell me about him. Huh? Ace. At that, Luffy stiffened slightly, but Nami tightened her grip in response, and Luffy slowly relaxed into her embrace. If you can't get your mind off him, then you might as well tell me all about him. Luffy stared directly into her eyes, as if mesmerized, and Nami shifted slightly, feeling off-centered. She had seen that expression on his face once or twice, mostly when he complimented her navigation skills or intelligence, but she had never seen it look so awe-inspired or in such a subdued context. A blush crept onto her cheeks, and though she suppressed it, she couldn't deny the bashful pride she felt. The navigator resisted the urge to play with his hair, her hands feeling out of place on his chest. Regardless, she refocused him, flicking his chin to snap him out of it. So, you gonna tell me or what? Start from the beginning, doofus. Nami had never felt such relief as when his iconic face-splitting grin appeared. Besides, she couldn't deny she had wanted to hear more about his childhood, of which Ace would certainly have been a part. She settled in with a contented hum, focusing entirely on her captain as he began to speak. The beginning? Huh. Well, Ace's mom gave birth to him probably. He never met her though, his dad being Gold Roger and all. Nami nodded along before actually processing his words. Wait, what the fuck? Morning came, and Nami's awakening wasn't exactly as she had expected. She carefully opened her eyes. Given how utterly comfortable she was, it took her some time to become fully aware of her surroundings. First, she realized that the room was being illuminated by sunlight streaming through a small window she hadn't noticed the night before. The second thing she noticed was that someone was holding her tightly, pressing her against their chest. Was she dreaming? She had to be, right? This was the first time she had woken up next to a guy. Considering she usually snuck out at night and looted their vaults while they slept in post-coital bliss, she shifted her gaze to the person lying next to her. Sleeping next to her, with a huge smile on his face, was Luffy. Realizing her face was just an inch from his, the navigator went beet red, also noticing his arms, since when were they that toned, wrapped around her waist. Her brain finally processed everything at once, and she instantly reacted. She had placed Luffy on the other side of the bed once he'd fallen asleep, but it seemed the two of them had. Yeah, no, watch where you're putting your hands, idiot. Her shriek was accompanied by a swift punch to the face, which sent Luffy spiraling through the air and out of bed, crashing into the nearby wall. The captain let out a loud groan, nursing his sore face. Damn it, Nami, what was that for? He mumbled, grinning up at his blushing navigator despite her fierce glare. Don't tell me you're gonna wake me up like that every morning? As long as I keep waking up with you using me as a teddy bear, then yes, Nami replied, suppressing the fact that she had just had the best night of sleep in her life, without a nightmare or hint of darkness to be found. And waking up in someone's arms. There was too much to unpack there, so her subconscious didn't even allow the thought to surface. She began to heave herself out of bed, her feet touching the cold ground, and she flinched slightly at the sensation. It was then that Nami's memories came flooding back to her. Ace. Execution. Gold Roger. Nami shifted for a moment. That was quite the revelation. She groaned, placing her face in her palm. What kind of messed up family did Luffy have? His grandfather was Garp the Fist. the most legendary marine in history. His dad was Dragon, the world's most notorious criminal. And his, as she now knew, adopted brother was the son of the former pirate king? Still, her heart ached in sympathy for Ace. It made sense why the Navy was making such a big deal out of his execution, something she had explained to Luffy softly at some point during the night. She couldn't imagine how that fact had plagued him his entire life, and from what Luffy had told her, that was certainly the case. Poor guy. To invalidate your own existence like that. She wanted to wrap him in a hug, imagining how terrible his childhood must have been. But from what Nami could interpret, even if Luffy didn't realize it himself, Ace's life had practically been saved by Luffy. She had few doubts that, as with so many others, Luffy had been a shining ray of light in Ace's life, changing it completely alongside Sabo, their other brother. That had also been one hell of a revelation, to learn Luffy had once had another brother, but he had died, murdered by what sounded like the world nobles, as Nami had pointed out to him. It made that punch Luffy had delivered that much more satisfying. Regardless, Nami had cried when he shared that part of the story, much to Luffy's horror and confusion. To think her captain had suffered that kind of loss and had never even told any of them? And yet, Nami understood. That was just the way Luffy was, always looking forward, never back. Nami remembered what she had began to fall asleep, a blush creeping onto her face as the memory played in her mind. It's okay. I will look back at these stories so you don't have to. Nami didn't know why she had said it. Perhaps she considered the past more important than Luffy did and felt obligated to keep his stories in her mind forever, lest one day Luffy failed to realize their significance. She would do that for him, for the rest of their lives if she had to. Ace, Sabo, Garp, Makino, Shanks, the Red Hair Pirates, Uda, the Mayor, Daiden, Magra, Dagra, Pochi, and all the others. Nagori. Even the names of his enemies, the ones who made her heart coil in hatred after what they had done to her captain. Higuma, Porkami, Bluejam, Sabo's dad. Her captain's history was something she would now treasure, and she could understand how Robin felt whenever she read a poneglyph. It was beautiful to learn about, and Nami felt honored that Luffy had trusted her with it. She felt their dynamic had changed overnight, and somehow, they had become even closer. At that thought, Nami let a massive smile cross her face, feeling on cloud 9 at the sensation coursing through her. Luffy sprang to his feet, as if only now remembering the situation they were in. We need to talk to Hancock. Nami turned to him, glancing down at her clothes before she did so. She would get new ones soon. Luffy grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door. What if she's asleep? Then, we'll wake her up. Luffy's defiance would have made Nami laugh if not for the fact that it might result in Hancock hating her more, so she eventually just shrugged. Luffy was going to do something regardless, so they might as well get it over with. Still, she couldn't stop the sarcastic comment from escaping her lips. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds simple. Luffy released her arm, and Nami followed him at his side, as determined as her captain but perhaps with the needed reservation to keep them both alive. Once the two entered the throne room, they were immediately taken aback. There were no guards on duty, which was strange given how meticulous the Kuja warriors were about protecting the palace. The first time Nami had been in the throne room, Hancock practically had her own personal army patrolling and defending the palace. Was Hancock taking a bath or something? However, everything made sense once they fully entered the room. All the guards, and even quite a few civilians, were lined up outside the palace, begging to be let in. Ran and Daisy were keeping the groups at bay, demanding that they cease their panic and calm down. Ever curious, Nami's interest could not be piqued further by the time she and Luffy finally reached the open doors, with much of the crowd looking at them. Thankfully, since they had been staying in the palace itself, they didn't need to pass through the crowd or get past the guards. Nami looked at Daisy, tapping her on the shoulder as she asked her question, and the warrior practically jumped in shock. What's going on? Weather Witch, Daisy yelled, steadying her heart but allowing her eyes to widen as she realized who she was speaking to. She turned to Ran with a hopeful smile. Perhaps the Weather Witch could help. Ran, however, greeted the two far more coldly than Daisy had, likely still upset about the previous day's events. She glared at them before giving Daisy a skeptical look. Daisy, she's a Weather Witch. Her spells manipulate the weather, they don't heal. And, for all we know, she could have done this. Rand's murmur caused Luffy's temper to spike. No one accused his navigator like that. Noticing Luffy's fist clench, Nami quickly stepped in. Let's settle down, we don't even know what's going on. We just want to speak to Hancock. How dare you demand such things of our princess, in her time of illness no less. Nami frowned in confusion. Illness? What do you mean? For a moment, Rand seemed reluctant to speak further on the matter, but after a moment's hesitation, she acquiesced. Our princess, Rand's voice quivered in emotion, emerging as a whisper of fear, has collapsed from an unknown disease. Elder Nyan was struggling to remain calm. Usually, whenever the Empress fell ill, most deferred to the former ruler for guidance in leading the kingdom in Hancock's stead. Now, Nyan could hardly stand. Her whole body shook with a sense of dread and fear that stemmed from a familiar place she couldn't quite identify, but it traumatized her all the same. The whole day had been horrible. As soon as the sun had risen, Hancock rose with it, recalling her agreement with Momonga the previous night. She revived his crew and, without another word, sent the vice admiral on his way with enough supplies to last a month. Of course, as he left, the Navy officer felt the need to shout warnings about what would happen if Hancock did not honor their agreement, though he also mentioned he would contact her via transponder snail about the issue of reparations. Nyan didn't know whether it was bluster or a prediction, but the elder had sailed the seas properly, unlike all her predecessors and successors. She understood the way the Navy worked better than anyone. She had been on God Valley. She knew what the world government was capable of. Without Hancock's status, the Marines would completely lay waste to the island of Amazon Lily. It was because of this that everyone felt a sense of relief when Momonga departed to the outskirts of their waters, though the sight of the distant Navy ship still served as a constant reminder. Nyan hoped the anxious Sea Kings would lash out thanks to the storm and destroy the vessel, but that was wishful thinking given the power of the Vice Admiral aboard. Regardless, once the battleship was mostly out of sight, Hancock returned to the palace, only to collapse to the ground after taking just a few steps. Sandersonia and Marigold helped carry their sister back to the palace to be treated by Belladonna, but the healer was clearly strained. Nyan could see the healer's hesitation and half-efforts in helping the snake princess. The rowdy crowd outside certainly wasn't doing the witch doctor any favors, Nyan concluded. Nyan understood everyone's concern. While, yes, Hancock was a brat and a pain in the rear, she was ultimately her brat and her pain in the rear. She loved the snake princess like a daughter, and now, seeing the warlord in such a state utterly broke her heart. With her skin glowing bright red and her breathing erratic, it was evident that Hancock's health was declining, showing no signs of improvement. Belladonna encouraged the fever to help her recover, but without a diagnosis, all they could do was watch as Hancock clutched her heart, which thumped with a completely uneven and erratic beat. There was no doubt, Hancock was in unimaginable pain. Often, she would mumble, "It hurts," and other half-formed sentences, clearly trying to speak, which Belladonna eventually discouraged. All Nyan could do was wonder what on earth the cause could be. Hancock's entire body was in a state of flux, as if it were trying to rip itself apart at the seams. Nyan and Belladonna both knew, though, that if this continued at its current rate, Hancock would perish. All eyes in the room turned to the old woman, as if expecting her to have the answer to the snake princess's condition. I wish I see you'll identify this cyandition, but I cyano. It seems familiar, but I can't, my memory, it isn't what it used to be. Nyan mumbled mournfully, scratching her head as she desperately tried to meet the expectations of those around her to no avail. Sandersonia and Marigold, their worry palpable, looked at their sister's body with sad and terrified expressions. "What shall we do?" Sandersonia asked, but Nyan gave no reply. She had to think. Otherwise Hancock was dead. It was so familiar, on the tip of her tongue. But everything was so loud. In anger, she turned to the door between the throne room and Hancock's chambers where she currently lay. The shouting had gotten louder. How could anyone expect her and Belladonna additions? "Enyishida," Nyan called, looking directly at the blonde servant, who gulped and took a nervous step forward. "Yes, Elder Nyan. What do you need?" "Piece and quiet," Nyan practically hollered, pointing her staff at the door. "Go outside and tell those buffoons to keep their voices down." Enishida nodded, running out of the room as if her life depended on it. Nyan, satisfied, stood where she was, waiting for the noise outside to die down. It did not. Actually, it got worse. A growl escaped Nyan's throat. What were those fools thinking? She let out an angry sigh as she turned and began walking towards the door with determined steps. Marigold and Sandersonia watched her depart with confused expressions as the old woman threw open the door and marched through it. As soon as she was spotted at the far end of the throne room, questions bombarded her, and the noise grew louder. "Cyan you all shyut up?" Nyan bellowed, and every jaw outside snapped shut. Nyan sighed in relief. "You'd." Her tone was hardly happy, but it was certainly less frustrated. The sea of women outside watched her like attentive birds, and on the other side of the door in the throne room, the boy and his navigator looked at her as well. And just like that, everything clicked. The boy and his navigator. The boy, oh, who was she kidding? The man and his navigator. Relief at having found the answer flooded Nyan's being. The satisfaction of solving the puzzle allowing her to briefly feel a surge of energy as she sprinted back into Hancock's chambers, the entire crowd watching her in confusion as the door slammed shut. Marigold and Sandersonia stared at their surrogate mother with tilted heads and furrowed brows as Nyan sat beside Hancock, her face full of shock and chagrin. A smile breached her face as the mystery finally revealed its secrets. "If see yours. Why did I not think of it before?" "Think of what, Elder Nyan?" Marigold asked, as Belladonna regarded Nyan with a subtle yet knowing expression that went unnoticed by everyone else in the room. "Have you found out why Big Sister is ill?" "Marineford," Nyan muttered quietly, interrupting Marigold completely. At the words, Hancock began to writhe in utter agony, letting out a moan of pain. Nyan's eyes widened, her suspicions gaining evidence by the second. After all, that was where he would be leaving this island for. "Sayad'd be," she muttered before trying a few more tests. "Mon," at the sound, Hancock let out another scream of agony. "Lou," Hancock arched her back in distress, shaking like a leaf. Her fever spiked at that moment, and Belladonna turned to her with a lazy expression, placing a wet flannel on her forehead with a simple, casual motion. "Elder Nyan, stop torturing her," Sandersonia demanded. "Do you wish to make her suffer more?" Marigold agreed, scowling down at the elder with a venomous expression. "Teasing her?" Nyan mumbled, more to herself. "I'm not teasing her at all." Marigold and Sandersonia were immediately stunned into silence, wondering what the old woman meant, but she thankfully decided to elaborate. "I think I know what this is Nio. Diam this virus, for striking Nio of all moments." A hand reached up from the bed to grip Nyan's arm, and for a moment, everyone panicked before realizing it belonged to Hancock. Elder Nyan, her blue eyes seemed almost faded as she stared at the former empress. Am I going to die?" "Yes," Nyan replied calmly and instantly. Marigold and Sandersonia immediately paled, panic overtaking them. "What the hell are you saying? Stop making stupid jokes, Granny Nyan." "The previous empress died of this disease," Nyan admitted, silencing the room into a state of horror. "And do you not remember that Shikayaku had to give up her position? How about me? I too hyad this disease at one point in time. That is why I left the island. That is why Shaki has not returned. What do we need to do to ensure Hancock survives as well? She can't leave the kingdom too," Sandersonia reasoned, though she knew it would be a moot point if it was necessary. Anything to ensure Hancock's survival. Nyan stared down at Hancock in amusement. "Monkey D. Luffy." At Nyan's words, the snake princess immediately sprang up, her hair disheveled and skin beat red, but she was most certainly alive. "Luffy? Where's Luffy? Is he here? Is Luffy here?" Hancock yelled, volleying question after question to the old woman. And yet, all Nyan could do was watch Hancock in interest. There was something else. Something she couldn't pin, no matter. "Outside," Nyan answered, throwing her thumb toward the door. "He wishes to talk to you about the execution of Portgas d'Ace." All Hancock needed to hear was, "outside," and instantly, she was right next to the door, using all her speed to blitz past everyone in the room within the blink of an eye. Marigold and Sandersonia were pleased by the sudden recovery but were also left confused. Nyan remained where she was, massaging the bridge of her nose with 2 tired fingers. "Nyanki di Luffy, you really do have the luck of the devil," Nyan muttered to herself, both amused and exasperated. "You have my ode the mountain that many have tried to my ove, but all have failed." Hancock's entrance into the throne room was greeted with screaming cheers, but the woman didn't care at all. She was focused on her goal. Standing there with the weather witch was Luffy. Hancock's fever spiked for a moment, but Luffy turned to her as she entered the room with that smile she had been dreaming of constantly. The warlord blushed. Was her hair okay? Was she suitably dressed? Oh my, she wasn't suitable at all, was she? Despite all these panicked, internal questions, Hancock still moved toward Luffy, twirling a finger through her hair as she did so. "You had something you wanted, Luffy?" Oh, he was so cute. The way he had that scar under his left eye and the innocence in his voice, which still managed to sound strong and determined. Her knees shook with weakness. "Hancock," her shining knight said with his usual, bright smile. "Are you okay now?" Hancock felt panic overtake her. Luffy liked strong girls, right? Yes, that's what she had seen. Her fever spiked once again at that, though Hancock pushed through it. "I cannot be beaten by a mere illness." "That's good," Luffy said with a grin, seemingly pleased with her response, or so she hoped. "We need to talk," someone drawled from outside her field of vision, and Hancock's migraine spiked, nearly making her cry out in pain. But she would not show weakness. That sound, it annoyed her. Why did it annoy her so? Why did her insides rage with the power of a storm? This wasn't like how Luffy made her feel, so soft and relaxing. No, this was a tempest. "Not now, Weather Witch," Hancock demanded with a haggard breath, eyes never leaving Luffy for a single moment. "What do you want, Luffy?" The pirate captain seemed taken aback by the statement, blinking owlishly, but he still smiled, nonetheless. Man, this was going to be easier than he thought. "Well, I was wondering if you could take us along to that Warsa Nami and I can go rescue Ace." Luffy's grin practically lit up the room in Hancock's eyes, and she nearly squealed. "Luffy!" Nami yelled, grabbing the captain's ear and stretching it nearly down to her waist height. "You can't just go demanding things like that." "Okay. I mean, after all, we have to understand that she rules an entire kingdom and needs to protect all our friends who live here. I'll take you to Ace. Let's not forget, we need to be more cautious about planning to save Ace. Logistics, strategy, planning. We can't just, wait, what did you say?" Nami's brain finally caught up to Hancock's words, while Hancock continued staring at Luffy in a state of mild illness. "I said okay," Hancock said with a simple smile, desperately wondering if that had impressed the Straw Hat captain. "I'll follow you anywhere, Luffy." A long pause permeated in the air. "Cool, can we have some breakfast then?" Of course, Luff dropped their jaws in shock, and Nami stared at the Empress as if she were crazy. Hancock swooned on the spot, giddy at the thought of making Luffy happy. Sandersonia and Marigold couldn't find the words to articulate their current thoughts. Even if they were to speak, Hancock would not hear a word of argument from them. She planned to take Luffy and Nami to rescue Ace when Momonga returned to the island in a month's time, sneaking them aboard the battleship. In the meantime, Luffy and Nami would learn the basics of Haki and train, preparing them well for their infiltration of Impel Down when the time came. During that time, Luffy and Nami would stay in their palace guest room as Hancock's special guests. Oddly enough, they would remain in a room together at the Empress's own self-confused insistence, though she mentioned she would try to find a room closer to the throne room and, by extension, her chambers, and, first and foremost, Luffy and Nami would be treated with utmost respect and care. Finally, Hancock concluded by saying that they were now going to have breakfast, even though it was lunchtime, and that Luffy would sit next to her, but after some internal thought, Nami was to sit as far away from him as possible. Unfortunately, Luffy argued that he wanted Nami by his side, or he would go sit next to her. Hancock had seemingly broken down into a fit of self-cursing and blushing, as if overtaken by a strange sort of spell. Luffy just laughed, amused by the woman's antics. However, the two Snake sisters were still concerned. Hancock seemed ill, sluggish in her movements, and sometimes barely able to stand. Still, it was an improvement, so they didn't mind. Regardless, they were flabbergasted at what their sister had told them, and what she had planned. No one seemed to argue, and no one seemed to care, but Marigold and Sandersonia wondered why on earth their sister had agreed to an outsider's demand so quickly. It was utterly confusing to them, so they decided to confront Nyan about the issue. The granny seemed to know what was going on with their sister's behavior, so if anyone had answers, it was her. While breakfast, lunch, was served, and Hancock watched Luffy eat with an entranced smile, Sandersonia and Marigold snuck out of the room and headed back towards the throne room. Thankfully, they caught Nyan just as she was leaving. "Elder Nyan," Sandersonia called, being the first to spot the elderly woman, who turned to them quizzically. "Why is it?" she asked, evidently impatient and lost in her thoughts. "I don't have all day. You never did tell us what was wrong with sister. Tell me, is she alright? She still seems sick." "If she yollows that man, she'll be fine," Nyan replied, sighing as she leaned against her snake staff. "The problem is that Hancock is in love." "Love?" Marigold asked in confusion. What could Granny Nyan be talking about? Their sister already loved people like herself and her sister. "Thiad is correct," Nyan responded, scratching her chin. "The snake princess has fallen to a disease known as love sickness. It has claimed the lives of many past empresses who fell to the love burn. Thio, I must confess, I have never seen the symptoms persist in this manner. But I suspect the matter will resolve itself soon." Marigold and Sandersonia tilted their heads at the twinkle in Elder Nyan's eye as she continued to speak. "You see, love is always Hyurricane." She outstretched her arms as if proclaiming the matter to the heavens. The two sisters gasped loudly, suddenly understanding the type of love the old woman was referring to. Nyan, however, was not perturbed by her own dramatics and headed towards the exit. "So, if she follows Luffy, she'll live?" Marigold asked, wondering about the logistics of the illness itself. "Well, maybe." Nyan had that twinkle in her eye once again. If anyone could manipulate a hurricane as insurmountable as this, it would certainly be. "Never mind. So, you fell in love with a man as well, Granny Nyan?" Sandersonia asked curiously, realizing her surrogate mother had proclaimed she too had suffered from the disease. Marigold immediately covered her sister's mouth, but the damage had already been done. "Granny, Sandersonia began. Yes, I did," Nyan interrupted, her voice tinged with sadness. With a soft sigh, Nyan closed her eyes tightly, lost in her own memories. Oh, she would remember him, even if no one else would. A man liest to history now, the two stared at her in confusion. But what a man to fall for. "Hey Gloriosa," the captain cried amidst the party, and the former empress felt a small blush cross her cheeks. If this had been the beginning of their voyage, she would have been stuttering and squealing. How long ago that was, considering she was the second to join the crew after Newgate. Gloriosa felt a fond annoyance rise in her throat at the sight of his beaming, sinister, yet excited face. How had this rambunctious idiot managed to capture her heart again? If this is another wacky plan you want to share with me, please do try to keep the descriptive gore to a minimum this tea. Wanna fuck? Gloriosa's jaw went slack, staring at the captain of the ship as if he had just decided to speak gibberish. Surely, she had misheard him? Or perhaps he had misspoken. Yes, that must be it, she thought, rapidly burying her blush into her wine to take a swig. Endless fantasies she had entertained at night burst forth in her mind, and she continued to drink to scatter them away. The man tilted his head to the side for a moment before scratching his left sideburn and leaning on the counter next to her with a puzzled expression. "So, you don't want to then? Haki insisted to me that you did. Weird." Gloriosa choked on her drink, spluttering as the red wine splattered all over the room. No one in the room turned their heads. None of them cared enough about one another to react. Except perhaps for Newgate. But from the corner of her eye, she could see Stussy throwing herself at the larger man, occupying his attention. Not that she gave a single shit about any of that. She turned to the strongest man aboard with wide eyes, staring at him as if seeking clarification, but receiving only a roguish grin in return. Words failed to escape her mouth as she gawped. The pirate seemed to jump with glee, pointing at her as if he had just won a prize, and in this context, perhaps he had. Aha! I knew it. Well, I guess I didn't know until it was pointed out to me. That doesn't make me any less right though. Gloriosa just stared at him, wondering which parallel dimension she had accidentally wandered into or how much elbaf booze she had drunk. But all the idiot in front of her did was walk to the exit, holding the door ajar to reveal the moonlit night, a manic, tide-moving grin on his face as he gestured with his thumb towards the front of the ship. "Let's do it on the figurehead. The ogre will be so mad we did it on his so-called special seat. Chaos galore," Zebek raved, throwing the door open properly before turning back to Gloriosa with that smirk of his. "Race y'all?" Gloriosa's feet moved before her brain could even figure out what was going on. But she didn't care. She allowed herself to be swept into the current that was Rock's D. Zebek. She had abandoned her kingdom for him. She had abandoned her pride. She had abandoned everything. Because when Rox beckoned, you followed. Oh, he was going to break her heart. Or kill her in his chaotic storm of existence and planning. But it would all be so worth it. Because the seconds spent with him were what made life worth living. Elder Nyan. Nyan's head shot up at the voice, pulled out of her memories. It was Sandersonia, of course it was. "I'm okay," she muttered, despite it being far from the truth. Just remembering. Sandersonia chose not to probe further, allowing Nyan to drop the subject as the old woman continued toward the door, still issuing her guidance and commands. "Tell Luffy and Nami that, if they wish, I will be weighing their Haki training on the other side of the island. Tell Margaret and Kikyu to bring them to the Serpent Shrine." The Snake Sisters' jaws dropped, staring at Nyan in horror. Surely, she didn't mean. "If the boy wants to save his brother, I will Hyave to teach him and, with only a month to do it, I'll need all the HYELP I can get. I Hyave a funny feeling that he can pull off what no one else in history has ever done." The Snake Sisters stared at Nyan skeptically. Had she gone senile? To allow the man into the cave? It was a death sentence. What on earth was she thinking? About an hour later, the two pirates finally arrived for the start of their training. Nyan opened one of her eyes, snapping out of her meditation at the sound of the pirates approaching. Luffy, of course, was the first up the stairs, always so energetic, so eager. Nyan noticed the change in his clothes. Instead of the green shirt he had raved about yesterday, he now wore a blue shirt with a pair of dark shorts. The boy wore the same outfit but in different colors, Nyan realized in amusement, so simple. The navigator was, at least, more fashionable. The orange-haired woman was now wearing something that, from what she could tell, Kikyu had let her borrow. She wore a fur bikini top and a long white skirt. A pair of sandals, not of Amazon Lily's make, adorned her feet. The two were followed by Margaret and Kikyu, the latter of whom had somehow been convinced to wear a red poncho shirt and short skirt. God, did these two not realize the influence they had on people? "Hello, Elder Nyan," Margaret greeted warmly as she approached, a large smile gracing her face. Nyan returned the smile with even more warmth. Ever since her return to the village, Margaret had been a member of the Kuja tribe whom Nyan had grown extremely fond of. Of course, she had only been a child when Nyan had returned from her disgrace, but the two had become firm friends and confidants. Kikyu, on the other hand, had always been too cold for the elder's liking, though she didn't criticize it. Someone had to be on the island to defend it. However, she had been opening up recently, which warmed Nyan's heart beyond measure. The two were among the few who knew about the Snake Shrine's location, given their status as city defenders, and now, Luffy and Nami had been added to that small number. Of course, Sweet Pea and Aphilandra knew of the location, but they were currently on Weatheria, the first of the Amazonians to be interviewed by the Weatherian scientists in exchange for technology to make rain, which would massively increase the Amazon lily food supply. Furthermore, the Weatherian researchers offered to find a way to counteract the Navy's sea stone technology, restoring the defenses of the Calm Belt. But that would take time. Regardless, it seemed Luffy and Nami's deal had been more beneficial for Amazon Lily than anyone had first realized. Speaking of the two pirates, their reactions to the shrine were very similar. They entered with loud gasps of wonder and amazement at the beauty of the structure. The whole area of the shrine was nothing but a large cluster of intricate ruins, older than the civilization of the Kuja itself. The trees seemed to dare not come near the site, as if the forest itself knew the truths of what had occurred here long ago. The stones that made up the ruins were old and dilapidated, with some worn to the point of falling apart. But not all were in decline. The serpent shrine itself, for one, had been kept pristine and structurally maintained. Gentle pools of cool and calming water surrounded the shrine on all sides, as if it were an island in the middle of a small pond. The structures within the shrine were made of stone, and at the center of the shrine stood 3 snake statues. Nyan sat calmly beneath these statues, awaiting Luffy and Nami's approach from the steps leading outside the ruins. She nodded as they approached. "Welcome. Please, Syed." Both Luffy and Nami plopped down onto the ground upon her instruction, with Margaret and Kiku watching from a short distance. The 2 pirates sat upon the hard stone pathway leading to the shrine itself. "So, you wish to learn Haki, do you?" "To be honest, Nami came up with the idea," Luffy admitted, rubbing the back of his head as he nudged his navigator with a smile. "She's really smart when it comes to this sort of thing, and she wanted to learn more about it. We were almost beaten by Sandersonia and Marigold when they used their Haki," Nami explained, recalling the memories with a frown. "I really want to know what this Haki is and what it does." Nyan scratched her chin, staring at the 2 pirates. "Interesting. So, you might airly want to learn about it out of curiosity and because you have time to waste?" Nami and Luffy nodded in unison, eliciting an exasperated sigh from Nyan. "If we could learn about it, it might help us in rescuing Ace," Luffy explained, brows furrowed in determination. "We might be able to use it, whatever it is." Nyan chuckled at his dazed expression, clearly struggling with the concept of what Haki might be. "I can tell you this quite high-oncely, Luffy." Nyan began with a smile that still held a serious countenance. "If you don't yearn to use Haki, I can guarantee that you will not rescue Ace before his execution." Luffy and Nami's eyes shot wide open at this, the former wanting to protest but being cut off by Nyan again. "I believe you have encountered an admiral before, correct?" Luffy and Nami instantly frowned at this. Make that 2, both of whom had utterly demolished their crew without effort. "That Kizaru bastard. Oh, and Aokiji too." "Exactly," Nyan shouted suddenly, pointing her staff at the pirate captain. "They will be at Marineford for the execution, as well as the last admiral, a battalion of vice-admirals, a group of giant marine officers, and the fleet admiral himself. You will be outsilasted massively by these forces. Impelled down will have defenses similar to this, and I can assure you that you will not be able to beat them without the strength of Haki." "Well, what does Haki do then?" Nami asked, evidently worried by how much importance Nyan was placing on the concept. Nyan gave a sigh, looking at her with a forlorn expression, before looking to Luffy. "Your grandfather, Garp, will be there, Neo?" she asked the pirate captain, whose brow furrowed at the idea of fighting his grandfather, though it was also accompanied by a fascinated stare. "You know my gramps, old lady?" Luffy asked in awe, and Nyan could have chortled. "Know him?" His grandfather had brought an end to her pirate career and her love story. Oh, so long ago on God Valley. She more than knew him. She had despised him for a long time but now regarded him as everyone from the old era regarded one another. With respect. Garp is the greatest marine to ever live. He reached this position through the power of Haki. Nyan could see Nami growing impatient and decided to cut to the chase before the fiery navigator struck her on the head. Haki has been called many things over the years. Some know it as ambition. Others know it as will power or intent. Whatever it is styled, there is one constant. It can only be accessed by those strong of faith and strong of will. On this island, there is a tale we tell our children when they are learning about Haki to help them understand. I hope it shall help you understand as well. A long time ago, when the heavens and the earth first formed, 3 water snakes found their wa. Can we skip the children's story, please? Nami interjected, raising her hand to indicate that she quite wanted to move on. Luffy seemed to lull to the side, and the navigator knew that it wasn't going to be helpful at all. Nyan had other ideas, a tick mark appearing on her forehead as she waved her arms up and down energetically. NYO, IAMTYELLING the story whether you lyike it ORNYOT. Nami sighed, as Nyan cleared her throat, as I was sighing. 3 water snakes found their way into the middle of the calm belt, the Neptunians of the deep sea, at least in size. Buso, the oldest serpent sister, wished to remain in the calm belt as it was a nice home, A place where she could use her great powers of pure might over the other sea kings to protect her family. Kenbin, the youngest serpent, was arrogant and wished to see the world, having great knowledge and wanting to live on La. This sucks. I'm leaving, Nami said in a deadpan tone, walking off, causing Granny Nyan to splutter and smack her stick several times against the stone ground in protest. The racket caused the bubble forming from Luffy's nose to pop. The captain made a strange noise, rubbed his eyes, and stared at the old lady, scratching his head in confusion. And then, Snake Granny. What happened a long time ago? Nyan's jaw dropped. She could have burst into tears. Thios were the first FYOURWYORDS, she protested. Luffy burst out laughing, clutching his stomach, before the old woman's snake staff crashed down on his head as Nami returned to sit next to her captain. Listen, Elder Nyan, as much as I appreciate your desire to dumb it down for us, I think we can manage. Besides, I have a feeling that story wasn't going to tell us anything practical, was it? Nyan growled, not wanting to concede that truth. An old woman should have her whims, after all. Still, Elder Nyan refocused, ready to give it another go, a sigh escaping her lips. Very well. There are 3 types of Haki, 3 Psyolers if you wild. Nami and Luffy now stared, actually paying attention this time. The Psyolor of observation, which allows you to detect other life forms as well as giving you the ability to predict their actions. Then, there is the Psyolor of armament, which gives the user a sort of spiritual armor, making my OST attacks useless except Thios of great significant physical force. Luffy scratched his chin, trying to remember why all of that sounded familiar. It can also make Dival fruit powers useless. In other words, Nami yold punch you over the head, Luffy, and you would actually feel hurt by it. Luffy tilted his head in confusion, a puppy-like frown appearing on his face. But she already does that? Nyan stared at the 2 pirates for a moment before bursting out laughing, perhaps the loudest laugh she had ever performed. The 2 pirates tilted their heads again, question marks practically appearing above their heads. So, I can already use armament Haki? Nyan laughed even harder at that, wiping a tear from her eye before settling down, enough that she could stare at the 2 with a fond and amused sigh. Neo, I think it is something else. You'll figure it out. The 2 pirates sat there, more confused than ever, and Nyan decided to continue before they had an aneurysm. Those 2 types of Haki can be used by anyone, as long as they have a Styrong Enyo will power. And these 2 can advance into further versions, but nothing on that for Nio. The last type can only be possibly accessed by a few people. Only 1 in a million have the ability to use such a Haki. Thio, I must admit, there are theories one can get on this type of Haki as well. But I could not tell you. This Haki is one that you can use, Luffy, the Psyolor of the Psyonkerer. It acts as a way of intimidating Thios who are weak, as well as being able to increase the strength of the other Fjords. Oh, like what I did in the arena? Yes, indeed. Nami frowned. Of course, Luffy would have that type of Haki. He was practically willpower incarnate. However, she did have a question. Do you think I could gain that type of Haki, Granny Nyan? If she had access to this rare ability, or the potential to gain it, she would want to know. Luffy would need all the help he could get. Neo, Granny Nyan instantly replied, and Nami sagged her head in disappointment, because I believe you already have it. Both Luffy and Nami stared at her in shock, with Nami gesturing to herself as if asking whether Nyan could be talking about anyone else. But Nyan did not elaborate, she pressed on instead. Now that you are aware of your Haki power, it will make things much easier. Training this Haki skill will be tough, but I imagine you 2 are going to rise to the challenge, Neo? Luffy nodded with a wide smile, and Nami finally snapped out of her daze, sitting up straight with a determined look on her features. So, if we know Haki, how do we get better at it? The captain asked, tilting his head, likely confused as to what the old woman wanted him to do. That is why you are here, Nyan announced, casting her arms wide to gesture dramatically at the entire shrine. The Shrine of the Serpents. It is a magical place. Fabled that if you bathe in its waters and train under the watchful eyes of the 3 serpents, then you shall master Haki quicker. I don't know if it is true myself, But it is worth a try, Neo. Regardless, it is secluded Enyo that we can cut loose on your training. Luffy grinned at that, slamming his fists together and standing eagerly. Well, let's get to it then. Not so fast. Fire is also a way air on this island to unleash the ability to control your Scionker's Haki, but the my method is not entirely practical. NY1 has ever completed it, not even Hancock. Luffy looked down at the old woman with a quizzical expression, and Nami raised her brow. Why had Nyan taken so long to mention it? Really, sign me up, Luffy shouted instantly, and Nami sighed into her hand fondly. IW yarn you, Nyan said, her expression becoming deathly serious. If you want to do this, I Cyano promise you will Siame out sane. Nami let out a laugh, fist raised against her hand, eliciting a look of confusion from the elderly woman. Oh please, this is Luffy, he can't even spell sanity. Luffy scratched his head, turning to his navigator in confusion. Nami, what sanity? I rest my case. Nyan seemed satisfied with Luffy's response, as if this was what she had wanted. Nami's stomach stirred uncomfortably for a moment, but she chose to ignore it. Ace. That was their focus. Siame along then, Nyan said darkly, walking around the statue of the three serpents and disappearing. Just remember, if you enter the cave, you may not come out alive. The cave? Luffy whispered, but he received no reply from Nyan. He walked around the statue to see that she had gone down a decrepit path that led ominously into the mountain. Mystery cave, he mumbled to himself, and for a brief moment, Luffy felt a twinge of his confidence wane as if a voice was emerging from the mountain. Or rather, a disembodied voice. More like a feeling against his skin. With a final look at his navigator, Luffy walked off after Nyan, with Nami not far behind. As usual, Baltigo was bustling with activity, the nerve center of the global revolution. Crates and supplies were being loaded and unloaded onto ships at a rapid pace, and overall, the revolutionary dock on the far western side of the island was operating at maximum efficiency. Of course, nearly all the work ceased when a small, rickety boat docked in the bay. Everyone working at the docks paused, captivated by the rare sight of three individuals arriving at Baltigo. What the hell? Why had they been recalled? Those three were never recalled. Impossible. Aren't those the N army leaders? One of the men working at the docks commented, his jaw dropping slack. But they never come to Baltigo. Weren't they supposed to be investigating the defenses of Toto Land? What the hell are they doing here? Whatever the reason, the dock supervisor stated, causing several men to return to work out of fear of being shouted at, this means serious business. If Lord Dragon sent for the Trinity Stars at a time like this, then things must really be kicking off. Ignoring the speculation they had caused on the docks, the three individuals on the small wooden sailboat disembarked. It was a miracle they had managed to sail it in the Grand Line at all, given the unpredictable weather. The first off the ship's sea which he intended to use to tie the boat to the dock. He wore a jet black musketeer hat, with a single white stripe running across its bowl. The man looked no older than 19 or 20, but his sly smile gave the impression of an older, clever individual who knew much more than he let on. Beneath his hat, he wore a neat black tuxedo with a large, red bow tie around his neck. One of his eyes was cold and black as charcoal, while the other was a clockwork eye, with tiny gears and cogs visible behind the glass. His raven hair only added to the dark aura he seemed to be cultivating. The second person off the boat was female, and from the way she carried herself, she seemed to be the leader of the three. She had long brown hair and dark blue eyes to match. It was impossible not to notice that she was the most strangely dressed of the group. Expected, given that most army commanders had a penchant for eccentricity. She wore a pale blue kimono with long sleeves, a purple sash tied around her waist which clashed well with the countless swallows stitched into the fabric of the dress. A swallow was also perched on her shoulder, its eyes searching the dock for any sign of food or seeds. Strangely, she was not the youngest, yet she was still only 18 years old. She paid no attention to the bird on her shoulder, instead strolling up the ramp that the third person had set up for her. This third person was definitely the youngest, evidently no more than 17 years old. Judging by the dazed look in his eyes, it seemed as if the boy didn't know where he was, mentally checked out from his surroundings. A messy set of purple hair sat atop his head, a color that made him stand out even more. His pale green eyes glanced around, confused, and he raised a hand awkwardly to wave at the workers. His clothes, however, were mostly standard compared to those of the two next to him. A bright orange hoodie, lined with red stripes along the sleeves and collar, covered his chest, underneath which was a plain white shirt and a small triangular necklace around his neck. This was an army. Those whose operations lay in the New World. He stumbled nervously around his comrades, evidently aware he was drawing attention to himself. Luckily, the brown-haired girl noticed his distress and slowed her pace to walk alongside him. The eldest of the group shook his head at the two, continuing to walk forward toward a warehouse on the outskirts of the docks. Just before they could open the door, the steel structure opened for them, without any sign of who had opened it. The trio entered without hesitation, and once inside, the doors closed behind them. Quiet. That was what it was. Nishi Hiroto, a voice called from somewhere in the building. Yeah, the man in the large musketeer hat practically scoffed. Taka Kasumi. Reporting, the woman in the kimono responded, her tone astonishingly neutral. Nishi Ren. Present. The man in the orange hoodie replied with respect and deference. After they had spoken, the lights in the warehouse snapped on, revealing a blond man with a scar over his eye and a top hat standing in front of them, a grin on his face. Welcome back, you three. Sabo. All three jumped in surprise, not having sensed or anticipated his proximity. They still had a lot to learn. So, how did it go? The chief of staff asked, crossing his arms with a pipe in hand, looking at them with a raised brow. Well, Ren began. You see, Hiroto continued. We learned about the territory slug network. And then, the strangest thing happened. There was a pause, and Sabo leaned forward, waiting for the rest of their report. Kasumi sighed in exasperation, rolling her eyes at the sight of the brothers' antics. Big Mom showed up. We did a little fighting and then, obviously, we ran. Sabo blinked in shock before his palm went to his face. That was the one thing they had been asked not to do. The one condition of the mission. Did they see any of your faces? The three shook their heads in unison, and Sabo let out a sigh of relief. Thank the Lord for that. Still, it wasn't ideal. But, on the plus side, at least they had detailed specifications of Big Mom's defenses, should they ever need them. So, he considered that a successful mission. He let out a laugh, putting the trio at ease as he grabbed the two brothers by their shoulders, leading them towards the exit so they could head to Baltigo proper. There was a lot of work to do and a lot to catch the three up on. Well, the big man's waiting for you back at HQ. You guys are the first to arrive. Ren and Hiroto tilted their heads, and Kasumi raised a brow, walking ahead but turning to glance at her superior. First, what do you mean? Sabo let the smirk boldly cross his face. Didn't you hear? We're doing a full recall. The three blinked again. Surely he didn't mean the officers? And their armies? Sabo walked ahead, stopping to tilt his top hat and look at the group with an almost savage grin. A month's a long time, guys. The wind howled, signaling the approaching storm that was soon to reach Baltigo as well. We're initiating Stratagem 15.